All right, so good evening to everyone. I want to call our meeting to order, this special call board meeting for the Wake Board of Education. It is.
Yeah, I think that's the whole calendar question. Which one of those do we prefer?
Everyone, please mute their mics. I think, Mr. Pittman, I think that was you. So again, good evening. Welcome to our special call board meeting. I want to call us to order at 6:02 p.m. I do want to go through our roll call and make sure that we have a quorum. There are a few of our board members that are here with me this evening, so we are social distancing, and that's why I have my mask on this evening. So first we'll go through and do a roll call. Vice Chair. Mrs. Kushner?
Present, thank you.
Dr. Martin? Dr. Martin?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I had my sound off.
Okay. Mrs. Scott?
Here.
Mr. Hagerty?
Here.
Mrs. Mahaffey?
Here.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler?
Here.
Mr. Fletcher?
Here.
Okay. So we do have a quorum. If y'all will stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America,
And to
and the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice for all.
For all.
All right, thank you all for that. So we'll jump right into our agenda. Of course, we are here tonight for this special call meeting for the purpose of hearing additional information and voting tonight on returning to in-person, face-to-face instruction. I'll start with Superintendent Moore for your comments, and then we'll do some brief comments by the board if they so choose to do so. Superintendent Moore, good evening to you.
Good evening. I'll keep my comments brief. I appreciate the questions and requests that have come in from board members around additional information and the time to study the different survey results that have gone out since last week, and look forward to getting your feedback on a recommendation, final recommendation for this evening.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Again, want to welcome everybody. As I said, we're here in this special meeting with really one particular agenda item, and that is to review additional information and vote on our return and what that framework will look like for in-person instruction. I want to thank all of our parents, teachers, students, employees, faculty members, teachers, principals, all in your patience with us as we go through these deliberations to hear the framework, to hear the plans, as well as the processes and procedures for a safe and healthy return. So you will hear additional information from the superintendent and staff in terms of recommendation and subsequent vote for tonight. We all, I think, are concerned, both of as we have heard over the last few weeks, in terms of the risks and benefits of returning to school, as well as what are the challenges when students are out of school. And so that has continued to weigh heavy on all of us, but we feel like we have a really strong plan, and it is important for us to make the best decision for our students, faculty, administration, staff, and the community to help all of us be successful and do so in a safe and healthy manner. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Cash for any comments from her as well as board members. Okay. All right. Mrs. Kushner, any comments?
Yes, thank you, and good evening, Chair Sutton. Because we have gotten a lot of feedback and we've gotten so many comments, I do feel like this is a time of really heightened emotions and heightened expectations for months. And we all want to return to normal, but as one teacher, and I warned her I would steal this line, she said, normal doesn't live here anymore. So we're faced with a new reality that we're in, and we have to recognize that we have families who are very anxious. There are real developmental risks to students in remote learning. And we also have frightened teachers. We can't ignore the real fears that many of our staff have about what their schools look like currently under the COVID crisis that we have. So we can't dismiss any fears or anxieties or hopes or expectations. And we will have to deal with all of that this evening. And I'm grateful to our colleagues and to Superintendent Moore and her leadership team for continuing to work so hard on coming up with a common solution. But I believe in the 4 C's: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And we're going to need all 4 of those tonight. So thank you very much, Chair Sutton.
Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. We appreciate you. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I'm not exactly sure how to respond tonight. I'm extremely frustrated. I feel like we do not have the information that is to us to make effective decisions, and I am very concerned about the process. I have been wanting us to develop a plan for effective opening for a very long time. Back when we voted in June to go to Plan 3 transition, I expressed very considerable concerns that, well, we needed to move forward because we needed to develop a plan. What was presented to us was not an actionable plan. Tonight, I have no idea what the plan is that we're going to be presented with. I know that late last night, the board received a slide deck with a number of options. I've been working all day or in board meetings. I know that at 1:30 this afternoon, we got the new slide deck. I don't even know what the recommendations will be there. I know that 5:11 this evening, we finally got a response to the teacher and parent surveys. I have not had a chance to read those. Now, I have been following what's going on in emails, but emails, we don't have the same information that we get in a survey. You know, I'm concerned that we talk about, as Ms. Kushner even just mentioned, teachers' fears. Yes, there are fears of teachers, but we've also heard, and I think more than fears, we've heard a lot of rational concern. It's not just fear, it's, is it possible to do what we are being asked to do? Teachers are working significantly more than they normally do to try to make virtual education work, and they're doing the best job that they can. Things that are going forward, what I'm hearing are not just fears, I'm hearing practical solutions that we've not heard answers to. So like I said, I'm waiting to hear what is going to be presented. But we have had plans presented to us changing multiple times over the last 24 hours. That's not how plans of this level of magnitude and substance need to be made. I want to be clear. I want to develop clear plans for the safe opening of the schools. The school system, I think, did a very good job over the last week to develop the accountability plans that I and others talked about last week. I think those are now in place or close to in place, and that is happening. But I'm very concerned that we're going to get another situation where staff, I'm sorry, is asking for a board vote so that staff can go out to the community, particularly teachers and principals, and say, we're doing this because the board said we need to do this. That's not how it should work. I believe that staff has the responsibility to build an effective plan and build the capacity among their workforce so that everybody's on board that says, yes, this can be done. The board should not be in this position that we are being placed where votes could be seen as ignoring parents, votes could be seen as ignoring teachers and principals on the ground, votes could be seen as undermining central office staff. None of those are votes that we should be casting tonight. We need information in a timely fashion. I'm very sorry to be as frustrated as I am, but I take governing seriously, And we need to act in a much more effective business strategy because the plans that we're making have major costs and major health and safety risks. It is our duty to do this well and right, not rushed. I'm sorry for the tenor of these tones, but these comments, but I'm quite frustrated about the process because we could be doing so much better.
Well, thank you, Dr. Martin, but I don't think you're the only elected official that takes governance seriously. We all take governance very seriously and understand the role of our job as school board members. Mrs. Scott.
For the sake of time, I'm going to pass on comments this evening.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hagerty.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I appreciate it. We got a little bit of feedback. Trying again. Turn the sound down on the speakers. Let's go to Mr. Fletcher or Ms. Johnson-Hostler, and I'll go to another room.
All right, Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I wasn't prepared, so my apologies. There were two people before me, but it sounds like you are all in the same room. So I will be brief. I mean, as my colleagues have said, and we've all said for months, there is no easy answer here. We've asked a multitude of questions. We've gotten just as much feedback, if not more, from parents, community members, stakeholders, and our students and our educators and administrators, and every single voice for each person that I was able to respond to and those that I didn't, my sentiments remain the same. Every voice is just as vital to our conversations and the decisions that we make. And while certainly indeed it is our responsibility as board members, I also applaud people for being willing to engage with each of us as your elected officials, but also your community members as a parent, as a spouse of an educator, and as a school board member, and as a working mom. All of these things hit squarely with each of us, and especially during this time as we make decisions for an entire community. I certainly know that everyone knows that we're not taking
Ms. Johnson-Hostler, somehow you just became muted.
So I saw a note come up from Tim, and I don't know if he muted me because I saw a note that said you're muted, but I didn't take it seriously. The short of this is I thank everyone for all of their comments, and they were just as varied and divergent as you can all imagine that our community is. And I hope today that the decisions that we decide to make as a board that we'll be able, as I said, continue with the way that we're moving forward with our community intact. And still very much so engaging as we move forward. As the students that I had the opportunity to speak with this morning, who their opinions were just a split, and they got to share with each other. But I think the thing that I'll take away from this, and I hope that our adults, that's our parents, community, educators, administrators, will see the same. And the statement the students made is they appreciated the honesty that I admitted that this is a difficult decision, and down to the vote, I will be making a decision because my heart is heavy and my brain is full of information that I've received from everyone. But certainly I hope that they'll be like our young people and see the authenticity and the honesty that each of us will display this evening as we make one of, if not the most difficult decision that we've had to make. And so I ask the community to see our hearts and know that the decisions that we make means that we care about everybody, as I always say, from our bus drivers to our CNS, to our educators and everyone who touches our students. This safety and consideration includes all of you. And again, just know that I hope that you see our hearts and know that this is difficult, and we're with you in the decisions that we make this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Ms. Mahaffey, let's come back to you.
All right, let's give this a try. Thank you, Chair Sutton. It appears we are getting feedback, so I will join my colleagues in another room.
All right, Mr. Fletcher, let's come at you, and then I'll return to our other colleagues.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I have a little different point of view about what we're about tonight. Since March, we've all been thinking about whether to reopen schools for in-person instruction. Since June, we've been looking at what those parameters might be. With the ABC Science Collaborative, we have gotten specific ideas about what a reopening plan would be that focuses on the health and safety of both students and staff, which I think is probably the fundamental question that this board has had to deal with. And their insistence that there's a plan for the 3 W's that will support the health and safety of our students and staff, and that we have protocols available to us and in place should someone demonstrate symptoms of a disease at school, whether it's COVID or flu or something else. The question then becomes, how do we re-engage our students? And do we look at the most vulnerable, the most difficult to teach online? Do we look at the students who have finally established a routine in their virtual relationship with teachers in their schools, and then make a decision of which of those students is most likely to be able to come into the school building or may have the greatest need to come into the school building in terms of their academic and social development. And I really think that as we've gone through these different variations and looking at different models, that tonight we're going to see a plan that deals with those questions and provides us a roadmap to positively move forward with the opening of our elementary schools, with the continued commitment to virtual instruction for those students who are in that relationship with the school district. And I'm interested in having the superintendent's presentation and look forward to our discussion about the substantive way we can move forward positively as a school district. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Hagerty.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Good, you're good.
Mongo is but a pawn in the game of life. You know, I don't know where to begin here. This is something that we've been recommended to adopt Plan B, and we voted to adopt Plan B. Staff brought back to us that we needed to move to Plan B transition, and so we adopted Plan B transition. And then just last week, we had a recommendation still to go to Plan B. There was a lot of talk about alternatives. A lot of people were suggesting something different than the rotations that we've been talking about for weeks. They talked about, well, could we bring some kids in every day? Could we bring some kids, you know, some kids, maybe they stay remote. Maybe some people stay the whole semester on remote. But the plans that we voted for were for rotations of kids. And this is what our staff and parents and teachers have been expecting. Now, again, well, just even at our last meeting, I asked specifically, because there were all of these options being floated, what the plan we had voted on was. And I was told that it was Plan B, and we were given targets for how long it would take to implement Plan B, when we could implement it. And I know there's people that want to open schools next week. And the superintendent and staff have explained that it takes time, once a final plan is developed, to turn things around. So the soonest we could bring people in would be 3 weeks from whenever we make a final decision. We called a special meeting so we could make a final decision as soon as possible, so as not to delay that further. But I was very clear in asking, can we meet these goals? Can we meet this timeline? Can we meet the benchmarks for reopening on this date under Plan B without having to disappoint people, without having to change plans again. And I was assured that we could. Now, there's a lot of things we have to work out. You know, how do we ensure that it's safe? How do we make sure that all students and all staff with medical issues, with health concerns, or who have family that have these concerns are protected and have a virtual option? You know, how do we make sure all the PPP is in place? Are there suggestions like dashboards? We've gotten a lot of great suggestions for staff about how to improve this process. But the process has always been about reopening. And now we have another plan hours before, hours before the meeting, and we're expected to vote on this. And, you know, we can't just keep moving the finish line. It's not fair to parents. It's not fair to staff. It's not fair to the students. It's not fair to us as board members. So I'm going to have questions about what's being proposed. At this point, I'm proposing changes to what's been proposed. And I just hope we can come to a resolution tonight and not keep extending this process. Thank you for giving me the time to air these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair Sutton.
Good.
We are voting tonight after a long process of hearing that started back in June when we got our recommendations for Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, and needing to lay that framework. Staff has created a virtual academy. We switched to Plan B transition, and now we are ready to implement that plan. Based on questions asked, it looks a little different, but I know that we've heard a lot of feedback from students, from parents, from staff members, and I know my colleagues and I have read through that for a lot of this week, and here we are ready to make some decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. And certainly last but not least, Vice Chair Cash.
Okay, got my mask on, can't smile, but thank you. I'm not going to reiterate all the things that my colleagues have said. I'm frustrated tonight a little bit with a new plan that has been given to us hours ago that I don't understand that. I'm just going to say. And I think it was Mr. Hagerty was saying about we voted on a transition B. That's fine, but with the transition B did not have a date assigned to it. And that's a problem when you got people thinking you're going to open and you keep putting that date off. And that's my concern now, is that if we go with a recommendation to begin a rotation in elementary, we're not starting that till October 26th. And now these kids again will be on K1, 2 will be on computers until November, taking into consideration already the amount of time they've been on computers in little kids that can't really manipulate it well, a lot of them in daycare. And so we've lost a lot of time on that. So yes, we did vote on transition B, but that did not have a date on it. And that now became a problem for getting going. So what is brought to us tonight is not something I think that I would vote for, that is recommended by staff. And so I would still prefer to see all of the K1, 2, 3 kids into class on October 26th in full. I don't know whether that'll be something we can vote on tonight or not, but it is frustrating. It is frustrating. And I won't say again, we've heard from so many people, yes, there is nobody coming together on any of this. And it's a hard decision, but thank you, Chair Sutton.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cash. And as we close with comments, I just want to urge my colleagues to, while I understand and respect your feelings, each board member is entitled to have their own feelings. I do think staff has done an amazing job in what they attempted to do, and this was in one of the slides that we saw earlier this week or last week's meeting, and I just want to stress the word responsiveness. And that was what was talked about and promised by the staff to be, and that was responsive to not just the board, but to the community, to parents, to teachers, to principals. And so if you feel like we are getting information at the last minute, I would encourage you to consider the fact that this is an effort to not be unprepared or unplanned or last minute, but to be responsive to the questions that board members have asked right up to the last hour, to the emails, the concerns, the fears of our teachers, principals, and everyone else. And so I want to both appreciate and applaud our staff under the leadership of Superintendent Moore in an effort to be as responsive as they can and that they know how to do, to provide us with the information that we need, again, to make the best decision for our community. And so with that, I will entertain a motion to approve tonight's brief agenda.
Chair Sutton, this is Christine Kushner. I move approval of tonight's agenda as listed.
Mr. Chair, Bill Fletcher, I move approval. I'll second the agenda. Approval.
Got a motion from Ms. Kushner and a second from Mr. Fletcher to approve tonight's meeting agenda as posted before you. I'll call for the roll call vote. Mrs. Cash. Calling for the vote for tonight's agenda. Idea?
Aye.
All right. Mrs. Kushner?
Aye.
Dr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Hagerty?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler?
Aye.
Mrs. Mahaffey?
Aye.
Mr. Fletcher?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Tonight's meeting agenda is approved by unanimous vote. So our single item on the agenda on our action agenda for tonight is the return to the plan for return to in-person instruction. So I would turn it over at this point to Superintendent Moore.
So just call attention to where we've been for the last couple of weeks with the information item with the board meeting on September 25th, and then the special call board work session last week on the 23rd. And we are now back a little bit less than a week later on the 29th for a special call board meeting for a vote. Our desired outcomes for this evening. We are asking the board to ensure that we have a better understanding of how we've ended up where we are with returning to in-person instruction and the recommendations, be able to answer questions about what the recommendation means and how we've come about with it, and get any insights from the board or ideas or perspectives about this return phase in plan, any changes that you might want, and hopefully adopt a plan at the end of the meeting this evening, if that is the board's will. So I'm going to start, first of all, with all of the feedback that really started coming in just last week. You know, right before last week, we did a parent survey over the weekend. We did a staff survey as well. We did not have any parent survey results last week, or we had just started looking at the staff survey results. We have since also, we had conducted some student focus group sessions with middle school and high school kids. And then we also conducted a principal survey as well. And we'll talk more about where those all came from. So if I'll start with some of the highlights from the parent survey feedback. So recently, survey was distributed to all Wake County Public School System parents to gather their opinions on a variety of topics related to their initial school experience so far in 2020-21, as well as the potential reopening of school buildings for in-person instruction. The survey was available in English and Spanish. Parent responses were collected on behalf of approximately 88,769 students across 192 schools. Generally, there was favor towards early elementary students returning to in-person instruction initially first. A majority of Virtual Academy parents responded that they planned to stay with Virtual Academy for second semester. According to the surveys, parents have been diligent in preparing their children for the health and safety plans and protocols involved with a return to school. And finally, a lot of parents seem to be very comfortable making some changes to their children's schedules or teachers if it was needed as part of a return to school. So those are highlights from the parent survey feedback. Some highlights next from the student focus groups. So the district has been able to engage 2 student focus groups about their thoughts with their return to school. The high school student focus group was comprised of members of the superintendent's student leadership council, as well as other students that were recommended by their principal. The middle school group was comprised of students from 5 schools who have previously engaged in the Middle School Equity Collaborative. We were looking to leverage existing student groups that are accustomed to providing feedback in the district. As always, students provide us much to consider and overall remind us of the need to be our best selves when facing adversity. Across both groups, they focused on the need for safety in any plan involving a return to school. They acknowledged that this was a multifaceted issue. The students want structures for a return that create an environment where they remain safe. They want to ensure that we have processes for accountability by all. They worried about the safety of their own teachers and families as well. They also expressed concerns for their peers, some of whom they shared were struggling from a perspective of mental health or well-being during the current school closure. Students at both levels called out the need and the desire to connect with others more than what they're currently doing. They not only want to connect with their peers, they want to better connect with their teachers, noting the importance of that personal interaction with teachers as being a critical element of their experience. In a related note, our high school students in particular called out their appreciation for their teachers during this time. They understood and could see how hard their teachers were working to make this a successful experience for students, and that this investment made a difference for them and their learning, even in remote. Some of our high school students had experienced asynchronous times like the asynchronous remote learning day and had expressed that it allowed them to actually be more successful and find balance between screen time, life, and family. Finally, our students called out a truth that we do not refer to much in this discussion, that goals for the school year that would be present in any year still exist. Our students referenced wanting to make good grades, wanting to learn a sufficient amount so that they could do well in their next course or learning. Several seniors called out the desire to complete their college applications, get accepted to college, earn scholarships, and generally to finish strong. We certainly want to thank our thoughtful and insightful student leaders for taking time to share of their experience. Next, we want to talk a little bit about the highlights of the staff survey feedback, and we broached these a little bit last time around. Responses were collected from almost 8,200 certified staff representing 193 schools. The vast majority of the respondents, 73%, identified themselves as regular education classroom teachers, and a majority, 56%, had more than 10 years experience. The most preferable option among teachers was to bring back pre-K2 students first, along with regional special education students, and allow other students to remain in remote instruction until a later time. Pre-K5 was the second most preferred option. Roughly half of the teachers will have to provide both in-person and remote instruction at the same time, and in some classes, the WCPSS Virtual Academy courses as well. We did not know until we asked that question exactly how many teachers had that construct because principals create those schedules at the building level. Overall, WCPSS teachers so far this year are reporting spending significant additional amounts of time planning for instruction outside of the school day to support remote learning to a greater degree than they did before the pandemic. Ensuring that staff are comfortable and proficient in using and modeling the needed health and safety procedures is critical to ensuring a successful Plan B, and they felt like there were still needs there to do that and plan for it, that they were not there yet. Teachers remain concerned about a return to in-person instruction. As an example, the ranking of the return to school options suggested that the more students that an option would return, the less enthusiastic teachers were about it. Those are the highlights from the staff survey feedback. Then moving into the principal survey feedback. A lot of us have spoken to principals over the last couple of weeks and months, several that we reach out to whenever things are being considered. I know that board members have spoken with principals and they have contacted us, we've contacted them. We felt it was important to do a system-wide survey with specific questions based on some of the questions that the board had asked last week to ensure that we were getting voices from all principals. 192 of our principals responded to the survey that was put out. 61% of them indicated that starting in a 3-week rotation and phasing into all in person was the most feasible plan. Pre-K2 and K-12 regional programs were their first choice for that phasing in. And grades 4 and 5 remaining in remote through first semester. 23% rated this as the second most feasible choice. There were 4 other options that were presented to principals that had a number of different characteristics that had significantly less support. In our middle schools, 86% of the respondents indicated that remaining remote for the remainder of the semester was the most feasible option they felt to complete the semester. And in high schools, it was 81% identifying remaining remote all semester as the most feasible option. Our principals were asked to really talk about all these different options in a priority order, which one they felt was the most feasible, then next, and so forth. And you can see that their recommendations as the leaders of their buildings would give us some pause with regards to the recommendation that was presented last week. So in looking at the revised recommendation that you see on slide 8 here, and reasons for revising that recommendation from last week. So for pre-K3 and K-12 regional programs, the recommendation remains the same as it was last week, to begin October 26th in a 3-week rotation for 1 cycle, and then to begin in November 16th with daily in-person for all pre-K3 and K-12 regional programs. That remains the same as it was last week. For grades 4 and 5, we had proposed bringing in a phased rotation for a cycle and then moving to all in person. That is being revised to remain in remote through first semester, and I'll speak more to that in just a moment. And then for secondary grades 6-12, we had contemplated bringing them in sometime in November for a couple of rotations, a couple of cycles of the 3-week rotations. And the recommendation is now remaining in remote through first semester. So in terms of looking at the reasons for these recommendations and changes, the changes in this recommendation do reflect a couple of things. A more careful review of all of the survey feedback that we got from parents, teachers, principals, and other staff members, as well as the comments from students. The one area that was common across all of those sections of feedback was the importance of bringing in the youngest students for in-person instruction. That is what this recommendation reflects. And then looking at the feedback, and there were a lot of questions that were asked by the board as well last week in terms of wanting some more specific and additional data on some details that we had to reach back out to schools to get because of how they had crafted their individual schedules at schools. Schools, I think, can implement the recommendation for last week, but some of the hardships that came up and the finer detail after looking at the survey results and asking for additional data included items like, once elementary schools untangle virtual academy from Plan B students, what will class sizes look like in 4th and 5th grade for an all in-person, all return at the same time, not in cohorts? And so we pulled that data and we had to have principals actually separate students by hand at the school level because that's not the way they are separated in Power School. And we sent information to the board that around 38% of our 5th grade classes do in fact have class sizes above 25, you cannot maintain social distancing in those classes if they all come back at the same time. And then for grades 4, 31% of our classes are 25 students or greater, where you cannot have any level of social distancing for the 6 feet that is contemplated in DHHS guidance and recommended. So between that knowledge of what was happening with 4th and 5th grade classes in terms of class size and social distancing, and then also looking at what was happening with regards to untangling virtual academy from Plan B students, it is likely that the virtual academy class sizes for 4th and 5th grade might grow larger as we separate out teachers and bring them back to in-person instruction in the building for the rotations if we did that. And so we felt like, we were in all of these cases, you're trading off one thing for another. And so the recommendation to keep 4th and 5th grade in remote really was due largely to the inability to social distance if we brought them all back together. The feedback from schools, teachers, and principals about the class sizes and untangling from virtual academy. There was some, it's not as large as at the high school, but the changing of teachers would have to happen as well. And I also think that there were a lot of questions and remarks made last week from the board about how do we mitigate the fact that by coming back into rotations, we are asking a large number of our teachers, and that's what we were finding in the data that we were pulling from and looking at more closely, how many of them would be required to be doing face-to-face, remote instruction, and virtual academy. And those numbers are not insignificant. So we know that becomes an additional burden on our teachers as well. So those multiple platforms, the class sizes, the impact on virtual academy, all which came out of board questions and queries last week, staff made the change to recommend 4-5 remaining in remote through first semester. For secondary, grades 6 through 12, that change remaining to remote through first semester. That is the place where one of the questions that the board also asked was, can you remain socially distant in a high school once you've divided grades up into thirds? And in a high school in particular, less so in middle school because they do teams, but in the high school, because everything is a period by period schedule, and there's really only one course, and that being English Language Arts, that's grade level specific. All other courses are mixed grade levels. Whatever mechanism you choose to divide the student body into thirds, whether it's alphabetical, or it's by grade, something by grade level, or by first period classes, or by home rooms, that doesn't guarantee that if you did it by first period classes, that in first period you may have a small group of students. But when you get to second or third or fourth period and those kids go out and go to other classes, you haven't divided them by thirds as they move into their next period. So the ability to remain social distance in high school through the rotations is just not a certain and not guaranteed. There'd be a lot of changes that would have to be made there. Principals also at the high school level, grades 9-12, have the most entanglement of virtual academy and remote Plan B students together. So in order to untangle that, one of the questions the board members asked us was how many of our students would have to experience teacher changes. And that's a very large number, 70%, 80% experiencing 2, 3, 4 teacher changes. So we had to ask principals to look at their data, look at their schedules, and look at how they had assigned their staff in their buildings to determine how to do that. That data was a little easier to pull because of a modifier in PowerSchool that allows you to distinguish virtual academy from Plan B students, which doesn't exist in the elementary grades. So the change here reflects a more conservative approach than what we had proposed last week. And it is due largely to, as I mentioned, compiling and diving into all of the survey data, parents, staff, principals, student focus groups. And quite frankly, the common area between those, the only common area was the importance of the younger students getting back in sooner. And then in other places, remote, changing classes, changing teachers, changing schedules, social distancing. We see that we are not on the same page there. And so you know that you're going to make one decision that moves along the continuum in one direction and away from another direction. It makes these decisions are just very difficult. And then the second piece really for making the changes has to do with a lot of those board questions and additional data that were requested by the board last week that staff went to work on to try to get those responses, and allowed us to really look more deeply at what the impact was so that we could bring forth a recommendation that reflected the additional learning and data that we collected from our schools. So here we are. I think if we, when we think about the proposal that we have before you now, it is responsive to all groups in some ways and not as responsive as all groups would like in other ways. All of them expressed a strong preference for the return of younger children, but that's about where it lands. While there are many different ideas among parents, teachers, and principals about the best option to use, we did feel like, because the term we used a lot with principals was feasibility, that this is where we landed on that. They are aware and have prepared for what a 3-week rotation would look like at the other grade levels, more in tune with what we did last week. But we did feel like it was important to bring forth a revised recommendation because of taking the dive into all of the feedback that we got that was not yet ready last week. So looking at maybe a calendar, sort of a picture of what that looks like. When you look at the recommendation for the phased in return to in-person instruction pre-K-12 on the next slide, when we look at this phased in return, you look at pre-K-3, just as a reminder, we are asking that they return in rotations to allow teachers and students time to acclimate to new routines and health safety procedures. It's the same recommendation we made last week. It is one cycle. And then grades 4 and 5, again, not being able to social distance, having more than 25 kids in the classroom, teachers operating in multiple platforms, and the virtual academy entanglement and potential of those class sizes having to go up as teachers are pulled for in-person, led to the revised recommendation that you see for 4th and 5th grade there, that they remain remote through the first semester. For K-12 regional programs, they will be following the same plan as pre-K-3, which would be to have one cycle in rotations and then return fully to in-person on November 16th. Looking at the next rotation for grade 6-12. So in this particular rotation, let me make sure I'm on the right place. Okay, so next slide, please, for 6-12. So these rotations, when we went back and took a look at the feedback from principals, over 80% in both cases, about wanting to stay in remote because they felt it was more feasible. One of the points that came out was the fact that in the rotations, this would generate 2 cycles of 3-week rotations, which would generate 8 days of in-person instruction. And there was a lot of concern amongst particularly the high school principals that are into their courses that students are getting more actual synchronous FaceTime with their teachers in remote than they would be FaceTime in the staggered 3-week rotations coming in for 2 of the 3 weeks at the end of the school year. And again, the rotations included the fact that teachers, and more so in high school, even than middle, would have to be working in multiple platforms so that they would be, and let me just take this a little step further in high school. If I'm a high school teacher and I teach 3 sections of Math 2, in those 3 sections of Math 2, I will have the students that are in the in-person rotation that I deal with during the 3 periods that I teach, and then 2 different cohorts of students that are not in class, but are Plan B that will rotate in at some point that I'm also taking care of, and those students who might be on virtual academy. So that's a large, that becomes as many as 10 or more cohort groups of kids that you're working with, depending on how many virtual academy students you have. So that was just a large number of cohorts of kids to have to work with. And so we felt that the multiple platforms there, in particularly at the high school level, warranted a review, and is likely the reason that so many principals felt that remaining in remote for the remainder of the semester was a more feasible option. And then, of course, I told you already that the number of teacher schedule changes and changes in untangling the entire schedule were really big challenges for schools. And they felt like it would be better to start second semester with an opportunity to build schedules that would more reflect how we would step into in-person instruction second semester than to try to do that before the end of this semester. Couple of additional considerations. We also spoke to the board last week of the inclusion of up to 1 day a week or maybe additional remote learning asynchronous days in order to provide teachers that no matter what level of Plan B we are on, we are going to have teachers that are working in multiple platforms. We've already heard concerns where they are right now, and even those in the virtual academy of a remote learning asynchronous day that provides a break not only for families and students, but also for teachers in order to do the considerable planning that they are saying through the teacher survey is occurring based on having to teach in this new modality. And of course, we would also probably would want to ask as a part of this that we retain the ability to bring high school or high school course students in during the last week of the first semester for any in-person state exams that the state is requiring students to take in person. There are not many courses that will require in-person state exams, but for those courses and those students, we would need to be able to bring them in during exam week at the end of the semester to do so. Like to entertain any questions or comments. I have a bunch of folks available as well as myself to respond.
All right. Thank you for that, Superintendent Moore. Really appreciate it. All right, I've got several hands. Ms. Mahaffey, I saw yours first. Is that for the purpose of making a motion?
I'd like to ask a little bit more about 4th and 5th grade in rotation. I'm a little concerned that they would be remote this entire time. I think that is a lot we're hearing from our families that are on Plan B. Can you tell us more about that decision?
So before we start the discussion, can I entertain a motion to approve this recommendation and a second so that we can then, for the purpose of discussion, I know board members have questions and concerns and
Sure.
may or may not, but for the purpose of discussion.
I'm happy to make a motion to accept this for reasons of discussion.
If I could request a quick clarification, Chair Sutton, one of the requests that also came out of the board meeting last week was to split the pre-K 5 and regional programs from the secondary recommendation. So it may be helpful to understand if this particular motion is for one or the other.
I'll tell you what, so to keep it clean and not go through the whole exercise of coming up with a particular specially worded motion and then have to rescind that at some point to do something else, I will just allow the discussion without that. So we can just have questions or comments about the presentation and then move towards a motion when we are closer to clarity on what we're voting on. So Ms. Mahaffey, I'll allow your questions and we'll just move right into a discussion from there. So go ahead.
So
okay.
Ms. Mahaffey, I got your question.
Yes.
So really, the recommendation for 4th and 5th remaining remote is tied more to the feedback directly from schools and teachers about what they felt was most feasible. There was a considerable amount of feedback that the rotations would be possible for 4th and 5th grade, but some of the concerns around the number of platforms that teachers might be on was still a concern, and the potential impact on what it might do with the enrollment and class sizes in virtual academy. But when we made the recommendation last week for 4-5 to come back full in person, that is really the main point of distinction. This recommendation here reflects the preponderance of the feedback that we got from school level staff about what was feasible. But if you're asking, would rotations 4 and 5 would mitigate some of those things, meaning that rotations 4 and 5 would allow social distancing if they were in? I think that may be part of what you were asking. So yes.
Yes, that is what I was asking.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mr. Hagerty.
Sorry about that, Mr. Sutton. Thank you.
No problem.
So again, I'm back to where we were last week and the discussion about, rotations. And Superintendent Moore, I know you said there's no good plan B. There are going to be problems with any plan B implementation. But likewise, there's problems with any plan at this point while we operate under the rules of this pandemic. And while we operate under the restrictions from the state, this plan is putting elementary school kids back earlier, but it's also putting them in, it looks like, on a plan A model after that first week of rotation. And then we don't have 4-5, we don't have 6-8, we don't have 9-12. And that's not plan B. And I know that we've surveyed and that these have been the preferences, but I'd like to see us talk about, if a plan B rotation of students at these other grade levels were feasible second options. They might not have been the preferred option because maybe keeping people in on remote may have been easier for some levels, but are these still acceptable? Are these still options that we can implement? I know everyone has their own questions about this presentation. I know we don't have a motion to vote on yet, but I'd like to see us explore, and I'd like to get more justification about these other grades, both, kind of the plan A for the elementary kids versus a plan B, but then also why middle school and high school kids are being kept on a plan C. I got some of that from your presentation, but I'd like to hear more discussion from the board about what we want to do. And Mr. Sutton, I'll stop for now and then reserve the right to discuss this more later. Thank you.
Okay. We'll certainly come back to that and keep that in mind. I think I sort of have an idea of how I want to organize the discussion, but I'll go ahead and allow for the questions first. So Mr. Fletcher, thank you for that, Mr. Hagerty. Mr. Fletcher, I'll come to you.
I think you're still on mute, Mr. Fletcher.
Well, there you go. Thank you. Madam Superintendent, clarification, please. I believe you indicated that 38% of our 5th grade classrooms and 21% of our 4th grade classrooms would likely have 25 or more children in them under a complete return to school. Does that include all of the children who are in the 1 semester commitment to virtual academy, or is that only the children that are currently committed to the Plan B group?
The 38% in 5th grade classes 25 and bigger, and the 31% for 4th grade classes 25 or bigger for 4th grade. reflects only Plan B students. It does not take into account Virtual Academy. So these are the students that would be returning in a Plan B scenario.
And it's likely that some of the people who are a single semester Virtual Academy would choose to move back to a more in-person structure when that option is offered. So these are minimum numbers that we would expect in the building on a full load, if you will, coming back in. Now, are we dealing with 6-foot social distance or 3-foot social distance as the current recommendation from DHHS? And does it vary by grade level?
The recommendation from DHHS from social distancing is 6 feet. If you return students in Plan A, that social distancing is recommended, continues to be recommended, but not required. And so where staff has landed is that we should follow the recommendation from DHHS, even in Plan A, to maintain that social distancing, which we are able to do pre-K to 3rd grade because of the smaller class sizes that are already legislated, but it's not possible to do in 4th and 5th grade.
I understand. So then, okay, I'm happy. I appreciate the information, and I understand. Then why only one rotation of 3 weeks for the K3?
So because those classes are smaller, and we think that they can handle the one cycle and then come in. We also believe that because this is our youngest group, that working hard to get them back to full in-person instruction as soon as we can is also a priority. And that is one area that there was consensus across, the only area that there was consensus across all of the groups that responded to surveys.
And I would tend to agree with you that early on when we had discussions about transportation, for example, which group would we want to get into the building? And those that would struggle most with remote learning and keyboard skills and things like that. So, all right, thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. Superintendent Moore, principals were meeting early on, even before we received the guidance from the state and the Lighting Our Way forward document. Isn't that right? Part of the core team, there were principals assigned into groups for different subject matters and different operational considerations.
I'm sorry, what was that again? I was having a little trouble understanding you.
Sorry about that. I don't know if my connection's bad. I was asking, principals had been meeting since before we received the document Lighting Our Way Forward. Isn't that correct? They've been meeting in groups for different operational considerations before we even had the specific guidance from the state on how to compose plans A, B, and C. Is that correct?
There has been work since when we first closed in March. It was really about, getting through the remainder of the school year. And there were tasks associated with that required us to come together. But before the end of the school year, we started pivoting towards what the reopening of the school year would look like. So there was work that was done and options that were contemplated prior to the guidance from DHHS and the governor's office, but we really couldn't move forward until we had that guidance to know what we needed to plan for.
Right, absolutely. I do think it's important to highlight that, in regards to the plans, I realize that this proposal, this new proposal, doesn't have cohorts, but I've asked repeatedly for examples of how cohorts would be supported. Are there examples for that? are there ways that there are plans in place that, somewhere that could concrete ways to help teachers if we were to operate in cohorts?
So I'm going to let Drew take a stab at that since I saw him pop in and I know he's working on that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Scott, and thank you for the question. I think this question, I think, came up yesterday in the Student Achievement Committee meeting, and what I can tell you is we've been working to gather specific examples, Ms. Scott, from schools across levels and across calendars. And there is variance, as we've talked about. One of the things, so what I can tell you is in front of me, I've got 12 or 13 specific models or examples, depending on a grade level or a team, in the way this is set up. And I want to be very clear, and I think we've been clear about this since the very beginning. Any model that a school implements, when anytime a teacher is going to be teaching in multiple environments, is going to be a challenge. And I don't think that there's anything that a school can do or the district can do to completely minimize or mitigate that challenge. But I can tell you some of the examples that have been given. We've got elementary schools, Ms. Scott, that are assigning instructional assistants to each individual teacher. And their plan, if we moved into a Plan B transition, would be to have that instructional assistant work with the students, for example, that are remote, while the teacher is working with the students in the classroom live. We've also got and have received examples and exemplars that we'll be sharing should we move forward in any iteration of a Plan B rotation with schools as potential models that they might consider. We've got other examples where, at a high school level, a teacher who perhaps is teaching both Plan B and their remote students may spend a significant portion of the class time, the 90-minute block, for example, working directly with their in-class students, and then work with students who were remote for the second half of the class period. We've also got other specialists in schools that are being assigned. We've seen models where schools have developed a team approach, where there's a PLT of 5 teachers. 2 of them are working with virtual academy students strictly. 2 of them are working with students that are in Plan B transition and in person. And 1 of them is assigned to work purely with those students who are working remotely. And so those are some examples of what some schools are planning to do. And certainly our intention moving forward would be to do our very best to identify what some of those exemplars are, share those across the district in an effort to provide schools with additional mechanisms and strategies to kind of troubleshoot and problem solve to mitigate some of the challenges that we know that our teachers are going to experience when anytime they're working in multiple learning environments. And so I hope those are a few more specific examples than perhaps we've shared in the past that might be helpful in providing some understanding on how this might look in a school setting.
Thank you, Mr. Foote.
Chair Sutton. Chair Sutton, I wanted to just call out very quickly. We had asked, several board members had asked Dr. Benjamin if he could join us this evening from the ABC Science Collaborative, and wanted to give him a couple of minutes because he will need to get off probably shortly to just provide some reaction or thoughts to where we are in the discussion and questions that have come up so far.
Okay.
I think Ms. Kushner had put a question in the chat about it. So Dr. Benjamin, are you still on?
And Beth, could you take down the question and comment slide? Could you take down the presentation? Thank you.
Mr. Sutton, are y'all able to hear me?
Yes.
We can.
All right, okay, thanks. So let's see, I was asked a couple of questions about overarching. So I was asked a few questions that it's really not appropriate for me to respond to. So let me just kind of respectfully address those and then decline. One of those had to do with should there be 2 rotations or 3 rotations? That level of detail is really beyond the scope of the ABC collaborative. That gets to a level of advice that's probably not appropriate for us to get into. We tend not to, we don't advise whether or not to go to school or whether or not to go to Plan A. We simply provide input on the data. Your colleagues across the state, some of them have opened K through 2, K through 3 to success, and others have opened K through 5. I would say it's a little more common to open K through 5, but by no means is that substantially, that's not a dramatic difference between what you're seeing across the state. That's number one, at least in the first couple of weeks that folks have opened. Number two, it has been not uncommon for other districts in the state, and those both groups have had success. It's been not uncommon for districts to open stepwise K through 2 or K through 3, and then open up 4, 5. It's been not uncommon to go the adaptive curriculum, then K through 3, then 4, 5. Those groups have also had success in avoiding secondary transmission. So differentiating between those plans is not appropriate for me to talk about. The one thing that I know that, and based on prior discussions and from what I've heard from prior discussions from leadership staff in Wake County public school systems, is that the team has it's my understanding, and it just happens to not be on this slide. The team has put forth or has bought into the concept of prior to moving between steps, the team within the district will assess secondary transmission if those events occur within the school district, and will also be assessing what's happening more broadly across the county. And so even though that's not in outlined on a specific slide, at least that I saw about half an hour ago in this meeting, my understanding is that will be a part of the process. If the board has questions on ways that can be done, I can address those and what folks have done, and what are high quality ways to do that. And then finally, I was asked if some of the information on the prior webinars for teachers could be made publicly available. And the ABC Science Collaborative.org website just went up and went online. It's now publicly available, and folks are welcome to look at that website and by all means provide critique and feedback, ideally to one of the faculty other than me, but if you want to email me directly, that will be fine as well. In all seriousness, we want the public to look at it. We want the public to see those webinars and to give us the feedback that makes it more usable for them and is more of service to them. And some of those questions about how to put on masks, et cetera, are on the website. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Benjamin. All right, Dr. Martin.
Thank you. And, as Ms. Moore mentioned earlier, I am one who would like to see these split up, because I think we've got multiple different ideas to consider here. First of all, I completely concur that the highest priority needs to be our youngest students and our special education and students, particularly the regional spec ed, because I believe most of those cohorts have the greatest challenge with respect to the online environment. That said, I would like to see in the plan pretty clear guidance that for those who would like to, in those categories, who would like to stay in the remote environment, that option should be available. Because again, what is being discussed, as Mr. Hagerty pointed out, it is not exactly the plan B that many of our constituents thought they were signing up for. And particularly the pre-K has never had a remote option. And some of our spec ed really would like to see going in person, and others would not. So I would really like to see a component of the plan that, while it is focused on how do we get in person available to these children who have the greatest need to get off of the computer. And I'm not saying others don't have the need. I'm just, understanding the triage we have to work with. As we make that plan, I want to make sure that we're conscious of the folks who feel like, no, I can't do that. And so I guess maybe that's my first question, is to our pre-K and particular regional spec ed, but even those in K3 who are hearing things that are not the plan B that they anticipated, how do we meet those needs?
So I'll start that if that's okay with you. Dawn, I know you know Dawn Dawson. She's already working to determine what sort of interest there is for a virtual pre-K option. We didn't address that initially because that, quite honestly, is not the best way to provide instruction to younger students.
And we all agree.
But based on feedback, she's already taking a look at that. And just to be clear, those students are receiving remote instruction now. So we have addressed that. I think it's important to know that we do have students who are in regional programs also enrolled in Virtual Academy. That of course will impact whatever rotation we come back in. Those teachers will also be teaching Virtual Academy and the students that they have in front of them. So that presents some additional challenges as well. But we already have that. We have developed some rotations with instructional practices that we think will assist with that. It's certainly not going to remove the complexity of having to do instruction for very challenged children in two environments.
So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, I understand what we're doing now and I appreciate the heroic efforts that many are trying to make. If I would read the plan and based on what I've heard, it sounds like, the plan going forward, unless you're already in Virtual Academy, the plan going forward is you now will go into this format. And so I guess my question is, for those in that cohort who feel like this plan is not what they signed up for in the plan B, are they being told you all must now go to this, which is really a pseudo plan A? Or is there an option for these families to, I guess, go into Virtual Academy?
So I'm sure somebody else
that needs to be part of the plan.
I'm sure somebody will jump in here and straighten this out if I get it wrong. But right now, we have students who have enrolled in Virtual Academy and students who have enrolled in Plan B. Right. And our staffing is based on that. Mm-hmm. So any changes to that, of course, would change our staffing patterns, and we don't know what that would be like to change them now. It would certainly be premature, and we don't know what impact it would have on the available teaching staff in school if we would change that.
And again, I completely hear that and understand that, but again, I think this is related to Mr. Hagerty's question. We are proposing something other than what people who signed up for Plan B signed up for. And yet I feel like, to a degree, we're saying, you're basically going into Plan A. And I think about this in particular for our regional spec ed families. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I'm hearing this in some emails that this isn't what we thought we were signing up for. How is that part of the plan? I guess, I mean, I hear you that it's not what we planned for, but if we're putting a plan together, we have an obligation to have all that information so we can move forward constructively.
So I hear what you're saying. I think where you started with the question is do I have that plan for regional programs? And the answer to that is no. I have students in virtual and I have students in Plan B, and I have my smart staff have developed rotational plans that we think will help bridge the necessity for that planning, but I have not planned beyond that.
So again, what I'm trying to figure out is what exactly we're voting on tonight. So if we vote on this, do the regional spec ed folks who signed up for Plan B, for example, the vote that we're being asked to make tonight saying that you will follow this structure? I guess that's the question.
So I hope I can answer this. So if for regional programs where the vote is if you are in virtual academy, you would remain in virtual academy for this semester. If you have signed up to be in Plan B or you have not enrolled in virtual academy, you would come back if the board votes on those rotations in the rotations as they are formed.
Okay, that informs my vote, and I would love to see us expand that, because I do feel like there are families who do not feel like at least what has been proposed so far is what they chose. Let me move on to the second question about the K-3. So as recently as yesterday, I was hearing concern about the 3 cohort rotation, particularly for our youngest children. I mean, we all talk about summer learning loss, and I think any teacher is able to tell you that, you know, once kids are out of school for about a week, you're almost starting over again. And so this is the concern I was hearing, like I say, as recently as yesterday, that if we're going to do some staggered entry, that there may be an advantage to do grade level reentry as opposed to this 3 cohort reentry. Because if you have a group of, let's say, kindergartners who are in cohort 1, they're present for a week, they get used to whatever their strategies, habits are, and so on. But now they have 2 weeks where they're not exercising and practicing those, structures, whatever it is. Then in the week 3, they come back and we're expecting them to have remembered everything that started from week 1. So what I was hearing is that was a young child challenge for the 3 cohort rotation. And that's where I heard requests for potentially a grade level staggered reentry, which still would be staggered, maybe, like half day kindergarten kind of stuff to get the idea, but you'd work with 1 grade level at a time. So I guess my question is, staff is, was that option presented in the survey that was sent to staff? Because we have heard some reports that there was limited options that were presented, which makes the survey harder to deal with. And if not offered, what is the thinking behind the challenge of the learning loss from the cohort? So the balance between the grade level versus the 1 in, 2 out cohort model.
Dr. Martin, I'll respond to that. So I think in the beginning, when we created the 3 cohort model, one of the most important factors for us was to bring students in a limited capacity that would at that time be social distanced in the plan that the governor had set out at that time, keeping it at 10 or less in a classroom. And it was really about bringing students in a way that we could teach protocols, we could do it on a slow roll, and we could ensure that students and staff would have time to practice and teach, and in some cases find out where there may be things that we had not considered that we needed to address before students rolled in to more of all of them, coming in. The plan from the beginning was that folks who chose virtual academy would remain in virtual academy, and folks that chose the Plan B or Plan B transition, as we were calling it, would choose that with the hopes of returning to in-person instruction at whatever capacity we could make that happen in a safe and healthy manner. And so I think what we've proposed is to still continue with our 3-week rotation, bring students in. You know, yes, there are other ways we probably could figure out to do it with kindergarten and first grade. But again, we want to make sure that we bring students in as few numbers as possible initially, and to provide that practice and that time for teachers and students to acclimate, and then bring them in as often as possible in the daily in classroom. And that doesn't preclude us from looking at anything else in the future. But we've said from the beginning that we wanted to make sure we did it in a healthy and safe way for our students and our staff. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I was attempting to.
Yeah, no, it doesn't really answer the question. And I think we're in complete agreement that it needs to be staggered and in small groups. I think the real question is the impact of the cohort rotation structure. Because that, I mean, we know that in regular academics, but it's also behavioral issues, the whole issue of learning loss. And so the 1 in, 2 out, as opposed to, you know, a staggered grade level entry, both keep numbers down, or both are strategies to keep numbers down. You know, and so I guess that's what I'm trying to understand, again, because I was hearing this, and again, we don't have access. We're not authorized to have direct access to schools to try to figure all this kind of stuff out. And so, you know, all we're doing is listening as much as we can to the feedback. And that is some of the significant feedback that I have heard, is that, you know, grade level cohorts, as opposed to this 3-week rotation, would potentially be a more effective way to bring people in the small numbers, so that we get the desired outcome that we're looking for. And you know, if there's good logic one way or the other, that's kind of what I'm looking for. You know, I'm looking for the whys, because what we want to do is have the program that's going to be the most successful, so we can have the most successful reentry.
Dr. Martin, if I could add just a small piece to the difference between breaking up grade levels into cohorts versus bringing in perhaps even the same number of students, but fully by grade level in order to do it. So because the initial rotation that we want to bring in still requires and maintains social distancing and small groups prior to starting in the whole group, an entire kindergarten class. Bringing in like all K3, for example, or all K2 for a period of time is feasible from the point of view that you could fit them in the building and put them in different classrooms and maintain social distancing. But it does become a challenge with how you staff that. And so when talking to principals who were interested in that type of a model, and one of the alternatives that they were given, the challenge in that was whether or not they felt like they had enough staff, and that the right answer would be to deploy their instructional assistants, their specialists, and their other non-classroom teachers in a way that would support maintaining those classes broken up into smaller groups across the building all at the same time. So it was, I think they just made a sort of a value choice about being able to do that, or feeling like that was the best way to do it, versus bringing them in and being with their teacher during the period of time that they were there the whole time, as opposed to with an IA or the AIG teacher or the interventionist. And I think that was what was rolling around in their minds, the feasibility of being able to do that and the value of it, versus the 3-week rotations where they're split into thirds. I think there's positives to both.
Okay, well, and I hear you, so this apparently is your recommendation now. I would like to make sure that we're giving careful thought to the learning loss challenges of the rotation. I mean, you bring the staffing issue up, and that's where I'd like to transition my questions to the 4-5. And this is where I personally would like to see that be a separate vote, because I'm not particularly satisfied with the options that are presented of either the rotation or the all remote. I mean, we've known this challenge for a long time. I feel like a lot of what we're faced with, and I think this goes to even the middle school and the high school, is on one hand, we understand the problems of rotations. In another hand, we understand the problems of class size. And it feels like our response is, we can't, therefore we're just going to stay remote. And I'm not convinced that that's where we need to be. I mean, I think you noted it for the staffing issue with the K3, but 4-5 becomes an even bigger issue. Whether we're addressing it yet this semester or whether we're addressing it next semester, there's no indication that come next semester, we're still not going to need to be social distancing. I know that, like I say, at the university, we're already planning for next semester. Most school systems are already planning for next semester. So we need to be developing a plan right now to deal with this class size issue. I think the social distancing is critical and is going to be critical whenever it is. And so we've got to figure out a way to deal with it. And I think you noted precisely, it is a staffing issue. But I haven't heard us go to the county commissioners or anywhere to try to, increase staff. Our CARES money has largely been device oriented and PPE oriented. I think we did a good job with the FAST program where we went to the community and said, hey, we need people to help staff some of these FAST locations so that children can be supervised during the out rotations. I think comments from the public are not all wrong in the idea that if 50% are in virtual academy, you've got 50% in your buildings, they could be divided into 2 cohorts. Now that will work to lower the class size. What it doesn't do is provide staff. So it feels to me like we need to do some out of the box thinking of how are we going to staff those half and half cohorts. You noted potentially we have some teaching assistants, instructional assistants we can use, but we didn't have enough of those before COVID. So can we find a mechanism possibly to use some of the FAST employees, possibly put out a call to the community? I've heard lots of people say they're willing to volunteer. So, do we need to create an education assistant corps that would allow us to, have a teacher spend half the time with each of their 2 half cohorts so that we open up? I mean, whether we can do that yet this semester, whether that needs to be the plan for next semester, I don't know. But I'm concerned that right now this K5, the 4-5 option seems to be, oh, it doesn't work, therefore we go remote. And I guess I don't feel like we've done enough work to say that that's the plan we should be ready to settle on. I think we need to figure out a way to address the staffing and make cohorts work.
Dr. Martin, last thing I'll mention is that for second semester, a linchpin to that is when we provide families the opportunity to make those choices for second semester, whether they want to come back from virtual academy, go into virtual academy, or stay in virtual academy. That's the first sort of piece of information that we'll need to begin to plan for what the staffing will need to look like for second semester.
I agree that information will be important, but I think we can sit here today, just like back in June, we could sit here and think about the challenges of the 3 cohort rotation, and we need to be working on that today. I mean, if you even just look at Toyota, there was a report on NPR not a couple weeks ago of a Toyota plant where to maintain their work, it was a 2,000 person plant, they had to hire an additional 200 employees just to keep it going. I think we know that there's going to be challenges. We don't know the specifics, I understand that. But we know these are challenges that we're going to need to meet. So that's why I'm saying we need to start early to think about how do we staff up so that we can make a cohort model functional. So I guess without that addressed, I'm not comfortable with either a vote of saying, yeah, go in or yeah, stay out for 4-5. And I guess I'll conclude with my feeling about the middle and high schools. Again, I feel like we're kind of doing an all or nothing kind of strategy, which, it just doesn't feel like a good business plan to me. With exams, with the nature of a rotation, absolutely right that I don't believe that we can successfully go into a high school model particular. I don't know as much about the middle school in a short time, but it feels to me like, we have heard from both teachers and parents that, there is this human connection, that is missing. We very successfully scaled up graduation exercises that weren't perfect, but they did give a chance for people to connect with people. What have we been doing in the way of thinking and designing a plan to say, okay, our instruction model may need to stay remote at the high school level, but another thing that we need to do as part of that plan, while we probably can't go to full in-person instruction, can we create structures like we did for graduation? I don't know, but could we create some structures like we did for graduation, maybe every other week during these asynchronous days, in our sports fields, in our parking lots, something like that, so that part of our plan is actually dealing with this social component that we all know is lacking from the fully remote. So again, I just feel like, the options presented to us is sort of a can't do in person, therefore automatic remote, instead of some thinking outside the box to say, here's a need that needs to be addressed. How are we going to address it?
I will also say that, obviously the athletics plan is already in place and can move forward. Fredley Heath is working on something similar with arts programmings that will be brought forward as an opportunity and an option for students to figure out ways to do exactly what you're talking about. And similarly with extracurricular activities, I think some things might already be happening like that. And I think it's really just about maintaining the comfort level and knowing, the piece tonight is about instruction in classroom, in person instruction, but the other pieces that also provide support at the high school level, the extracurricular pieces, the co-curricular pieces, we have already started down the path of how we can bring some of those back, and we'll continue to bring additional ones back so that students do have some opportunities to do that in their schools.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent Moore, for the response, Dr. Martin, for the questions. Mrs. Scott, I think we might have cut you off. I wanted to come back to you. I know that we jumped to Dr. Benjamin because he had to jump on quickly. Did you have any other questions, or were you finished with your questioning?
I appreciate that. I was actually able to find my answer on the reopen guide. I was curious about the process for should there be a positive COVID case, and but I do see that there's a pretty detailed answer in the return to school guidebook online. But thank you for coming back. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you. Mrs. Kushner, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And I think it would bear still repeating to answer Ms. Scott's question, just so that we have an overall summary for the public at some point. I know we're getting a lot of information pushed out to families, and it's been a lot of information, but and I have a lot spinning through my head right now, because I was prepared after last week's presentation to come, and I thought the last week's recommendation was a modest and a phased-in approach, and I do support the 3 cohort phased-in approach. Dr. Martin, we have year-round schools that typically track out for weeks at a time, so I am not as concerned about even our youngest children having learning loss over a 2-week period. I think it's much more important for our staff and our students to come back to our buildings in cohorts and small groups to acclimate to school during this pandemic, to school with a mask, to school with the 3 W's. And I think that seems to me would be much more constructively done in small cohorts. So I support the phased-in aspect of the cohorts. I support the focus on our early grades, but I have to admit concern of coming today and seeing that our middle and high schoolers are going to remain remote. to support Dr. Martin's thoughts about, this psychosocial supports that they need through athletics, through co-curricular. I'm glad that we're moving forward, Superintendent Moore, but I'm also concerned that there are students struggling with remote learning. There are some being very successful. So what if we choose not to go to the 3 cohorts for middle to high school and for 4th and 5th, for those students for whom remote learning there's a lack of success? How can our teachers, if the 3 cohort model is too complicated, and if we are worried that that's going to add too much to an already stressed teacher corps, do we have specific strategies where we're going to help and reach out to students, whether it's in-person office hours at the high school level or a one-on-one office hour that's virtual? Many of our students are struggling with remote. And I asked yesterday at Student Achievement, how are we going to address these issues? So I'd like another robust answer to that question about our students for whom 4th through 12th grade remote learning is a struggle, and they signed up for Plan B. Sorry for the long question, Chair Sutton.
So, well, you hit on a couple of those the items. Our teachers now are working closely to understand which students are struggling so that they can provide additional support through their counselors or other support staff at the school. I do think it's also very important for parents to let teachers know when students are struggling, if the teacher hasn't identified it or isn't able to tell, and because that can manifest itself in so many ways. We know how hard our kids work to try to do what we ask of them. That's research that goes way back. Our kids try very hard to be responsive to what is asked of them. And so if our teachers are not catching it, I think it's helpful for either a teacher to hear from a parent or an administrator to hear from a parent so that we can set additional things in motion to ensure that we're addressing it.
And simply the stress of being remote is just coupled with what we've seen over recent years is a stress around grades, around the competitiveness, especially for our high schoolers who are looking to college and job admissions. I mean, it's a very, just the added anxiety it's a difficult time. It's been a very, I don't have to tell anybody else that. I thought last week was a modest start, but I also want to respect that it has changed because you've received feedback from not only our principals and our educators. We've gotten a high volume of feedback. I think all my colleagues would commiserate with that we've gotten a very high volume of emails of other connections with the community around this plan. And since March, our community has been divided around what to do in this last 8 months. So I think where we are tonight reflects that, and it's as Ms. Johnson-Hostler opened with, we are at one of the most difficult times of my time on the school board, and our hearts are with our community, and we're trying to balance a lot of different feedback. So I'll save maybe some more questions for later, but that's it for now, Mr. Sutton.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Mrs. Cash.
Thank you. Yes, I have some questions. I want to start with, we're talking a lot about surveys, and I'm concerned about how surveys are sent out and how they come back and how close to when we're making a decision we get an answer. So I'm struggling with trying to understand why we would put so much into a survey that actually just went out yesterday to our principals with only like 24 hours for them to answer that. I'm worried about that. I don't know that got a really true picture for us. And so when surveys are sent out and we get answers like, well, they have 24 hours to answer a survey, and then we get it back, I don't know how much credibility to put to that. I don't think there were any real opportunities for principals to make comments in there. I don't think principals were really offered other possibilities, like maybe not come back at all. Some principals didn't want to come back at all and may have picked something else, and that might have skewed what we were looking at. So I don't really understand why the principal survey went out so close to today. That's my question.
So that would be due to the board's questions about alternative models that principals had discussed with board members and the need to seek feedback from all of them on the feasibility and prevalence of the desire for those options. So we knew that principals were discussing other options. It was important to actually try to get a hold of all of them rather than just hearing from a few.
Okay. Second, last time I talked a lot with I do think our K3 should be back in class in October. I don't see, we've left them on a computer for a very long time. I think now we're talking about a transition for 3 weeks, meaning now they won't be off a computer until November. I think we've failed our K3 children that way. I've been pretty vocal about this, so this is not new for anybody to hear me. And so I think the last time I talked, there was a couple things that I asked and I haven't heard much about. And I think I asked you earlier today, Superintendent Moore, that K3 children on a computer all day does not work well at home, and it certainly doesn't work well in the YMCA or a daycare center. And could we compact their day into a half day with specials maybe later in the day? So there were some choices that parents could make to not keep their children on the computer all day long. And I need to kind of know that before I decide I want to rotate kids in and out, because I really want K3 in before November. That's one question. Let me just get the other one is, I think another question we talked about last time is that the middle school curriculum, with the amount of electives and the amount of work they have to do, is significantly hard. There's a lot of work to a middle school curriculum. Some schools may have extra electives, some school may not. And with the amount of homework they're getting at night, I think the middle schoolers are feeling an awful lot of stress in their daily routine, to the point where I think it's more than they can handle. I don't know if we've looked any more into that. I talked about that last time, about less time, less classes, less electives. I don't know how to go about that because I'm not the expert. So those are two questions, and then I'll finish up with one comment.
I'm going to ask Mr. Cook to talk to you about the work that he's been doing in response to the concerns about what the experience is like for our youngest students and what can be done there.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for the question, Ms. Cash. And I think this is something that you did bring up and we discussed briefly in the work session last Wednesday. I can tell you in the 3 business days since then, our staff and our team have continued to work on the issue. I think we hear the feedback just like you and other board members have in terms of screen time. And I think it is a challenge to find the right balance. I think there's a couple of things as our team is working to potentially develop some revised guidance on what those parameters for both live and asynchronous cumulative instruction might be, which of course equals screen time when we're in a fully online environment. A couple of things that I'll share that are important that I think provide an extra layer of challenge here. First of all, one of the challenges we have, Ms. Cash, obviously, is that in a fully online environment like we have been in thus far, anytime we start talking about minimizing or reducing screen time, we are also by nature talking about reducing instructional time. And so that's a really hard thing for any grade level, which we all recognize. It's especially hard, I think, and to your point regarding the urgent desire to get our youngest, most vulnerable students back into buildings. It's especially important when we're talking about kids who are literally learning to read. And so we want to be careful and cautious about that. I think also, we've talked about the FAST program. We are working with the Y, and we'll continue to work with them moving forward to identify areas that we can provide support. I think, one of another layer of challenge we have is that we've got, I think, roughly 5,500 students across the district in the FAST program, the vast majority of whom are elementary students, but we have to also juxtapose that with the fact that we've got 70,000 elementary school students in the district. And so when we start considering a suggestion or an idea to, for example, condense all elementary school schedules or by grade span, that decision will have a profound impact on the daily lives and schedules for 70,000 students, the vast majority of whom are not in some of the FAST programs. We have been working with principals to get their feedback on where that appropriate balance is. But you know, a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from principals in terms of condensing the schedule, for example, you know, all core instruction for pre-K 3 to be done by noon or within a 3-hour span, that would have significant impacts and probably some negative impacts potentially on the ability of elementary schools to deliver specials, you know, master schedules that have been built and implemented, and the significant changes that would come for families that would have to make adjustments, some of whom, as you well know, have built their own work schedule around their child's daily schedule. And so those are just a few of the really significant challenges that we have to work through, in addition to making sure that we don't get out in front of the board's decision in terms of returning to in-person instruction. So all that said, I want to be clear, we do have folks that are working to find that balance. I do think it's likely that we will be exploring minimizing or reducing the total number of hours that younger students may be receiving instruction via online, recognizing the cumulative impacts on young students around screen time. And we will also continue to collaborate moving forward with the Y to see where our academics folks can work beside them to better provide support to those students that will, in some aspects or in some instances, remain engaged in the FAST program, regardless of what the decision is tonight in returning to in-person instruction. So I hope that spells out some of the implications, and also I think hopefully exemplifies the amount of time and effort and work that staff, along with school staff, is putting into this really important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I don't want anybody to think that I want to cut curriculum time out for any of our early learners. I'm just trying to think ahead. If we look at a rotation, we are essentially now talking about another 6 weeks from now that kindergarten kids will be sitting at daycares most of the day. And there isn't much opportunity because of all the mixed schedules that we have in Wake County for them to have anybody that can take them to do anything else. It's hard for me to imagine that, but so that's my problem with rotation in and not all K1, 2, 3 coming in full. That would be what I would support mainly. So thank you, Mr. Cook, that you've talked about that. And I don't know who would address middle school curriculum possibly being, is that you two? Okay.
I could take a stab at it if
Okay.
Superintendent Moore will let me. No, so I think your question, Ms. Cashin, it's a significant one, and I think we've heard already a couple of other board members reference, you know, the 6-12 dynamic, and I think you referenced rightfully some of the unique challenges that our students and teachers face at the middle school level. I think first of all, I think we have to be honest and transparent, right, in terms of the recommendation that the board has in front of them. I don't think any of us on the staff side would title this anything close resembling a slam dunk. I think what we're all discussing are some really unique critical points that probably lead to some level of mixed feelings among all of us. And of course, the ultimate challenge that we all have is that when it comes to in-person instruction, you're either in person or you're not. And so in that sense, there is no mixed decision. So I do think it's fair to point that out. And I will say to your question, some of the feedback that we have gotten from our secondary principals around the Plan B rotations, and I want to be clear, it's not that it cannot be done. And I think the rightful question that the public, and I think Dr. Martin asked the question in so many words, is, okay, if not now, then when? Right? If it's going to be through the first semester that we remain remote, what's going to change that will mitigate some of these same challenges that are causing us hesitancy right now from an instructional standpoint. I think the one thing that I would point to in responding to that important question, and I think it gets to some degree to your question about middle school, is that from a purely instructional standpoint, the feedback that we have, I think, heard loud and clear from our secondary principals is that maybe counterintuitively, given how far along we are in the semester, given their observations and experiences and seeing what's happening, recognizing significant challenges that Ms. Kushner was just talking about in terms of kids who are drowning, who are struggling, who do need help, who do need support. The sense is that at this point in time, from a purely instructional standpoint, it may be more beneficial to remain fully in remote learning, to provide the consistency and continuity that has already been established, good or bad in some cases. But I think the other point is that there will be disruption, right? We've talked about the disruption that will occur mid-semester to student schedules, because even though we've been talking about the 3 cohort rotation now since July, the reality is, and I think it's really important for all of us to recognize, the reality is our principals, right, received those cohorts just a couple of weeks before the school year began, right? Not through anybody's fault. Transportation worked around the clock once it was determined this was the route we're going to develop those super complex 3 cohort models. And quite simply, in many cases, principals and schools just didn't have enough time to build a master schedule that would account for all these various contingencies that would prevent them halfway through the semester from having to make adjustments to go back in some type of an in-person rotation. And so I think that is part of the feedback that we've heard from middle school principals. It's not necessarily unique compared to what we've heard from high school. And so, and all of that, of course, has to be balanced with the fact that we all, every single one of us, including me as a parent of a 17-year-old Wake County Public School System high school student who desperately wants to get back to school with her peers, right? All of us have to weigh those instructional costs and benefits, right? Some of which are difficult to predict, with also the value add that comes along with the social emotional aspects that Ms. Kushner, Dr. Martin, yourself, and others have talked about. And so I don't want to sugarcoat. The fact is, it's a really difficult and tough decision, but those are some of the factors that I think are at play that led to us receiving the overwhelming feedback from our middle and high school principals.
Okay, that's good. Mr. Cook, I respect your opinion a lot, and you were very clear in how you went through that. So I really appreciate your answer. Thank you. I think that'll be it for now.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Cash. Mr. Blumberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had 2 points that I just wanted to add in just to make sure that the board was considering these points as you decide on what to do in this challenging situation with everybody operating in incredible good faith. Superintendent Moore mentioned at the high school level, the challenge of maintaining social distance with the potential rotations. And what I just wanted to mention is that the toolkit on that, and remember, high school doesn't have the option of going to Plan A, so it would have to be Plan B or Plan C. And under Plan B, that the social distancing of 6 feet is required and so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. That would be when students were in stationary positions, such as in classrooms. So I did want to make sure that that was understood as a part of the toolkit. The only other thing that I wanted to mention, because this also came up, was what about in situations where students are now moved to Plan A, full in person at some point, what about if a student or family wanted the child to continue to stay home in some setting, and that did come up. I did want to just reference what the toolkit does say. It doesn't create a right for all students to be remote forevermore, but it does include a provision for the students that are high risk. So students that are high risk of COVID-19, that the district under the current toolkit would need to make accommodations in some way to if that student wanted to stay home, if their parents wanted them to stay home. So I did want to just add those two pieces to the mix of conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to give you those two legal points. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bloomberg, I'm glad you went before me because I couldn't remember those details around high school. And as you all know, I've had a lot of questions about high school. As mentioned that I met with a couple of high school students again today. So thanks for clarifying the requirement Plan B and reminding us our options for middle school and high school are very different. I think I only have 2, maybe 3 questions left that haven't been asked at this point for me. I think I'm right, and Ms. Warren, you can just say yes or no if my memory really is mush these days. If everybody goes back regardless, if it's the 26th, our elementary school students, or the 9th, are they still required under Plan A to still have those 2 days the week of November 23rd as remote learning? Is that those 5 days still required?
Yes. So even no matter what kind of a plan school districts are in, the General Assembly required that all districts add a minimum of 5 days of remote learning to the calendar. So the remote learning days that are already identified in the calendar were required by legislation. We do not have a choice about those, just where we put them. Okay.
Okay, thanks. The other question, and this could be for anybody in academics, do any of our middle schools have A day, B day, or no? I only have 2 middle schools, so I don't know the answer. I've never asked. Sorry.
And I'm not sure if Mr. Cook knows.
I've never asked that question before.
We've seen variations on a theme. I don't know that we have anybody that's fully A day, B day, unless it might be an IB school. I think some of the IB schools that had middle years programs used to have to do something like that in order to get all of their requirements for the IB program. But I am not aware of any school that's fully A day, B day at this point.
7 years ago, East Garner did, but I don't know if that's accurate.
I believe it is, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, and I have to admit, not because I knew that, but because my cell phone is lighting up with text messages from my colleagues who are helping respond to that question. I think East Garner did at some point move to an AB schedule, and I believe there may be one other. So I think the answer is yes, although we would have to circle back to verify the specifics.
Thank you. I thought that was true for East Garner, but I didn't want to make the assumption because I didn't know West Millbrook made any changes. So that's sufficient for me. If so, either way, it's still probably not more than 2 schools. So thank you. The third question, I think I pretty much know the answer to this too. Do we only currently have 3 high schools that are still on A day, B day right now during remote learning? Is that right? Garner, Inlow, and Broughton?
And Millbrook.
No, Millbrook's definitely not on A day, B day right now. They're 4x4.
So they correct. They shipped this year. So yeah, I believe the answer is then 3 high schools that are still on A B day.
Okay,
and perhaps.
Oh, go ahead.
And again, I've got my friends that are texting me right now.
All our area soups and all the people who are helping out, we appreciate behind the scenes.
Yes. And so I think there's 3. There may be a 4th. That could be updated in just a moment.
No problem. So the follow-up to that is, and this was actually one of the student questions from Garner. Of course, no, I've been very transparent that Garner's in my district, and large part of that's been my conversation around high school decisions. Thank you, Mr. Cook, for letting me know what your daughter thinks as well. I appreciate that, adding her to my list of students. But I am curious. They asked me a lot about the IB program and their IAs that they're responsible for. And I had no idea if the district has started talking to IB about the impact to those students. It's not just us, clearly the whole the whole country. Certainly other parts of the world are also being impacted as well. But have we had conversations about the impact to these students that are in IB programs?
So, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, I spoke with the IBO this summer as we were contemplating the opening of the school year and just set before them a number of places where districts may need to require flexibility in the requirements of the IBO and our students that are in those programs moving forward, whether it has to do with reauthorization, scheduling, course content, the number of different things that might be difficult to implement with the choices that we had before us for what school would look like for 2021, sorry. And so they are aware. They said they would be flexible. We have not run into any specific questions yet that we're asking for an accommodation or a change in something, but there's still a good period of time before us because that all happens at the end of the year.
And thank you to my board members for allowing me to ask a question that's only for 3 high schools, but it certainly did for those students. They had a if-then, I felt like a great equation in terms of their recommendations to me. So I assured them that I would ask those questions before making my determination. So thank you for entertaining me for those 3 schools that'll be impacted. I truly do understand that that is a very small percentage, but so thank you for letting me have that time.
No problem, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. You are quite welcome. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Would a motion be in order? If so, I would like to move that we approve the elementary portion of this plan.
Can I get you to hold that just one second and let me talk about process just a little bit? And I think I've got, is that an additional question, Dr. Martin?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
Relatively straightforward question. Have teachers been surveyed about their willingness to come back based on this new plan? We did survey in the past with respect to those who prefer virtual and those who would prefer Plan B. But have we surveyed teachers about this new plan so that we know whether we have enough staff to be able to actually carry it out?
Superintendent Moore, you're muted.
We have not asked teachers what their plans are about returning or not returning, regardless of the plan that's being proposed. I think that the work during first quarter to try to allow teachers to become comfortable and get into the buildings and get prepared, it still will be a decision that each individual teacher will have to make for themselves. And we have feedback all over the place on this as well. Teachers who, might choose a retirement option, might choose another option if they're in the building. The feedback around the delaying the in-person return and the more students that came back, the fewer that were in favor of it did come out in the teacher survey, but not specifically as to what they felt about their employment status moving forward.
I appreciate that, but I also recognize that that is a critical component of what we do. I believe I heard that that's been an issue even in the New York City schools, for example, that they just don't have enough teachers to fill their plan. And so, again, for us to have a plan, it's got to be successful, and we've got to have staff that are going to be able to willing and able to carry it out. And I think that's something we need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we're going to bring this plan to a vote. You've heard the recommendation from staff. You've seen that pre-K through 3 and the regional program starting on the 26th, going on a 3-week rotation, then moving to in-person for grades 6 through 12, remaining in remote through first semester. I've heard a few concerns and questions around some of the different levels. Remaining remote, particularly around middle school. Also heard Dr. Benjamin talk about that is not uncommon to open stepwise. I think, as he said, K3 and then 4, 5, and there's been some success in avoiding secondary transmission. And to the point last week, I think raised by Ms. Johnson-Hostler about the desire to splitting middle school and high school. So what we're going to do is actually take this in 4 buckets and doing 4 separate votes. First on pre-K3 and regional programs, then on grades 4 through 5, then on middle grades 6 through 8, and then 9, 12. So I'll start with the pre-K3 and regional programs. Mr. Fletcher, I heard you started a motion earlier.
Yes, sir. I would move approval of the staff recommendation for pre-K3 and regional special programs as presented tonight.
I second that.
All right, I got a motion from Mr. Fletcher and a second from Mrs. Cash to adopt the recommendation from staff on pre-K3 and K-12 regional programs to begin on October 26th with a 3-week rotation and the beginning daily in-person instruction on November the 16th. Any further discussion?
I would just add, this is Jonathan. I would just add that in voting, that would, unless I've missed something from the presentation, that would include the possibility of a day each week of asynchronous work where students would be at home, unless I've missed something. I guess I wanted clarity on that.
Staff would be proposing that we maintain the ability to add additional remote learning asynchronous days, so up to there being 1 per week as a part of any recommendation for all.
Thank you.
I saw that as additional consideration, not so much something that had to be voted on.
But I am glad that it's part of the motion. I do want asynchronous days in there.
Okay. All right. So you've heard the motion. I start with the roll call vote. Mrs. Cash.
Excuse me, I have an additional question.
Okay, Dr. Martin.
So I'm a little bit torn on this. I do believe that it is important that we do open or find a way to safely open our pre-K 3. However, I remain quite concerned that that this plan, as I heard stated, forces anyone currently signed up on Plan B, whether that's the pre-K 3 or regional spec ed, that they must go into this rotation. And I mean, Jonathan, it did indicate to us that there is legal accommodation if a person is high risk, but you know, we also have seen that there is a variety of concern about what the high risk exactly means, whether it is for the individual, whether it is for the family that they're with, and we have heard that there's been a lot of tension around that resolution. So, you know, I guess I'm wondering if anyone would support any kind of an amendment that would allow for, you know, those. I mean, the highest priority, I guess, would be pre-K and regional spec ed to be able to, you know, switch from their Plan B to remote, should they so choose. Though I do think that this is something that should be available to anyone who signed up with Plan B, because I don't believe that this Plan B that we're offering is what people signed up for. So I guess maybe I'm making that as a motion that is an amendment to the motion on the table.
So can you clearly state your amendment?
That persons currently signed up for Plan B that we described in the past be given the option to remain in virtual for health and safety reasons.
Can I have a question on that, and is Jonathan, is this okay to ask a question here about that amendment?
I would need a second. All right, not hearing a second, then that proposed amendment dies for failure of a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
real quick, just to get clarification, just to get trying to get clarification on Dr. Martin's motion. At our last meeting, we had discussed that if a family did have a medical hardship, that there could be some discretion already just under the current plan. And so I don't want anyone to think that we're heartless, but I think many of us did not think that that was a necessary motion, because I know the superintendent has talked to us about taking care of the safety of our kids and making those accommodations where necessary.
Mr. Hagerty, the opportunity has existed thus far and will continue to exist at the school level for principals to engage families that want to make a change in either direction at once a plan for return to in-person is approved.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. All right, hearing no further discussion, I call for the vote. Mrs. Cash?
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner?
Aye.
Dr. Martin? Dr. Martin?
Yeah, I am going to abstain, knowing what that actually means, but I feel like there are things that have not been addressed and need to be.
Okay.
And a clarity for the public, the abstention would count as an affirmative vote in favor of the motion. Thank you.
It counts as an affirmative vote, but it is a statement to recognize that this has not met a functional business plan.
All right. Mrs. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Hagerty?
Aye.
Ms. Mahaffey?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson-Hostler?
Aye.
Mr. Fletcher?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So that's 8 votes in the affirmative with 1 abstention. The recommendation for elementary grades, pre-K 12 and regional programs is. I'll next go to grades. I'm sorry, grades 4.
Mr. Sutton. With a dog in the background. I would move that we approve staff recommendation for the grade 4-5 attendance plan.
All right, that's a motion from Mr. Fletcher for grades 4 through 5, which is currently not to stay on remote for the remainder of the year. Is there a second?
Is that first semester? I'm sorry. Chip.
Well, yeah, the remainder of the semester, which is the remainder of this calendar year.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Jonathan, if I'd like to make an amendment, is that after the second?
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
After, if there's a second, I'm not hearing a second yet.
Then can I make an alternate motion?
Let's just first see if there's a second, and if it dies, then you can absolutely do an alternative motion.
All right. All right, so I'm not hearing a second, so that motion dies for lack of a second. Mrs. Mahaffey.
Chair Sutton, I'd like to make an alternate motion that 4th and 5th grade go in person in a Plan B rotation.
Okay, that's a motion for 4 and 5. So we're essentially not accepting the recommendation from staff, but instead moving grades 4 and 5 to a rotation of the 3-week cohort model. And that would begin, for clarity, that would begin when?
I believe the 16th of November.
All right, is there a second?
I second that.
That Mrs. Cash?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Okay, so I got a motion and a second for grades 4 and 5 to move to the 3-week cohort rotation. And And I believe starting with the 16th, but we'll make sure that that's clear in the discussion. But right now we have a motion to move 4 and 5 to 3-week rotation instead of remote learning for the remainder of this semester. Now, any discussion?
I've got a question, Chairperson. This is Heather Scott. Thank you. And this would be to stay on a rotation. I just want to clarify Ms. Mahaffey's motion.
Correct. Because of the social distancing issues that we heard, it would allow them to be in person for a period of time, but also allow them to be socially distanced within the classroom.
Thank you.
And would we revisit that on the for the next semester? Would we revisit our rotations?
We will be bringing recommendations to the board about next semester as soon as, well, and not too distant future.
Thank you.
And Superintendent Moore, just tell us in terms of your thoughts or recommendation around when that might start. Are we saying on November 16th as suggested, or so I think what we heard before that we have the early grades coming in, that we would sort of work out the kinks first with that, and then think as you then come in on the 16th. Is that correct?
There, I believe the original recommendation maintained that 4-5 would come in
October 26th.
October 26th in a 3-week rotation, and then move to all in person. I think that you have a choice here as a board in changing that recommendation on when that would start. I would say that November 16th is when we contemplated them moving to the full in person. So depending on how you want to, if you want to split the stagger coming in, then it would be November 16th. If you want the stagger to happen at the same time that pre-K 3 is coming in, that would be October 26th.
And would you have an opinion on that?
Did you ask me?
Yes, ma'am.
I think there are different priorities in them. One gets kids back into schools 3 weeks sooner, and the other one provides more distance between the groups of kids as you stagger back in. So,
Ms. Mahaffey, I'm gonna then, it was your motion, so I'm gonna leave that to you. I think you mentioned November 16th, or were you thinking October 26th?
I was thinking the 16th, so that we could allow for one rotation to go in, as we heard from Dr. Benjamin last meeting, to kind of stagger the entrance of students.
Okay.
And I think it reinforces what he said today about there's been success K3, there's been success K5, and given our scale, I think that's a very wise way to go. Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't know if I disagree or agree. I need to clarify. So this would have our pre-K 3 regional programs starting their in-person on the 16th, which would be the first day week of 4 or 5 on rotation. Right? Ms. Mahaffey shaking her head. So, okay, thank you.
Correct. Ms. Cash, do you have a question?
No, I just think it's good that we're going to make a change. I don't think anybody in our community was prepared for us to say remote till the end of the semester. So I like this motion.
Okay. Mrs. Scott, is that another question, or is that a residual hand?
I just thinking out loud, I certainly understand the reason for this motion. I worry about some of the logistics with transportation and childcare, but I know.
Right. Mr. Fletcher.
I'm wondering how cohort rotation for transportation and all K3 for transportation work together in harmony. How do we make that work? We've got all when the 4-5 start in rotation, we'd have all K 3 in, and I guess it works. It'd just be, you know, which kids get on the bus. We're talking about the same bus for both age groups.
Mr. Fletcher, I'll just take a stab at starting this, and Mr. Schneidmiller is on, and he can certainly finish it and revise what I have to say. But I believe that we have 2 sets of bus schedules that are available to access. One is everybody in at the same time, which pre-K elementary schools would be a part of, and the other one is the 3-week rotations. So I have a feeling that it'll be some merging of those 2 that will accomplish what we're doing. And it may very well be just going with all students at the same time and then seeing which stops drop off if it's only a 4th or 5th grader that's not in that week. But I may be talking outside of my expertise here and would invite Mr. Schneidmiller to complete my thoughts or correct them.
Yes, good evening. Superintendent Moore, I think you're on track there. I think that knowing that we have half of our students, you know, just going through the math, we have half of our students in virtual academy. We have a 3-week rotation for grades 4 and 5, which means roughly a third of those grades would be riding the bus at any given time, along with elementary school pre-K through 3, as we get to November 16th, riding every day. When we look at those numbers, they work even for the social distancing requirement of 1 student per seat. So I think we're good with that rotation and that combination of pre-K 3 daily and the grades 4 and 5 on a 3-week rotation. And with that being said, once we move to Plan A, the restrictions for bus capacity are lifted altogether. So that works in our favor also. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fletcher, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, Mrs. Kushner, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to further clarification. I appreciate Mr. Schneidmiller, because when we looked at this plan last week, 4th and 5th grade were on the same rotation as K-3. So I was assuming that we would have worked out that transportation and that those cohorts had been, those routes had already been determined. So it should be as though we're taking some ridership, you know, we're relieving some ridership. So I think we should be comfortable with that from the transportation point of view. And I was struck, I have to say, I know it's a little out of sequence, but Ms. Moore, in your overview, that the parent survey results that showed only a quarter of parents would forego transportation, I thought stuck out to me as important information, because there's been an assumption that parents would forego transportation to have their children come in person, but they do need transportation. So I appreciate that Mr. Fletcher raised this issue, because it's critical. Our parents clearly need transportation to get to school. So I'm glad that we're addressing that.
Yes, I think just to clarify, and I would invite anyone who's on that don't know if Brad can confirm this, but I believe the question was only to Plan B families. So it would be 25% of Plan B families, just to clarify.
Thank you.
All right. Scott, did you have another question?
No, sorry about that.
Okay, Mrs. Cash.
Yes, I do. So now that, since we had not talked before about 4 or 5 going remote, and so that's why tonight we switched that to a rotation, since it had not been before the public yet. I do still want to figure out how we can help our principals in elementary schools bring K-3 in and a 4 or 5 on rotation with their teacher staffing. I still don't believe we've actually talked about how to help principals with teacher staffing for rotations. So how could we do that? I feel like we are just kind of leaving the elementary principals right there right out there right now with a lot of things to do. Is there a way to talk about our 4 or 5 teacher requests that we might need to do to our county commissioners or to whoever could help us get staffing positions?
I think what I'll say there is I've opened up an email that I'm getting ready to send to leadership whenever, if this vote goes through, so that we can actually assess what it is that this means for schools and then what do we need to do to help? So.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Moore.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yeah, I'm just clarification. The motion is for 4 or 5 to re-enter school beginning November 16 on a 3 cohort rotation, and that rotation continues until the end of the semester.
That is
correct. What the motion is?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Martin.
I just have to note that in the survey that we got from our principals, 61% said that this option that is on the table was not feasible. And I will note that I would have to vote no on both options, both the stay fully remote and this option, because I cannot vote on a plan where the majority of our principals are saying it's not feasible. I believe that we do not have a plan that is effective for grades 4 and 5. We need a plan. I just don't think that we have one at this point. Thank you.
Where's that data point from, Jim?
That data point is on slide 7 from the presentation today.
All right. So you've heard the motion. Again, looking at grades 4 or 5, coming in on a 3-week rotation beginning November 16th. I'll start with the roll call vote. Mr. Fletcher.
I'll vote no.
All right, Ms. Johnson-Hosler.
No.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Aye.
Mr. Hagerty.
I'll vote aye.
Mrs. Scott.
I'm really torn about this. And I agree there has to be a better way. I have to vote no.
All right, Dr. Martin.
Concur, there must be a better way, therefore I must vote no.
Mrs. Kushner.
I'm a supportive aye. I think we need to phase in cohorts. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Cash.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So the motion passes on a 5-4 vote is my count for grades 4 and 5 to come in on 3-week rotation beginning November 16th. All right, moving to grades, the middle grades, 6, 7, and 8. Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I appreciate the comments from Mr. Cook and from staff. Again, what I'm struggling with is what we were presented with last week in regards to the assurances that we could open under Plan B, an understanding that we still have to make sure we have good, safe, PPE that fits, that works, that teachers have to have accommodations, that families have to have accommodations if they have health issues. But the plan was for Plan B. So I'm going to make the motion so we can get some discussion. Can we open 6, 8 under the 3-week rotation that was offered at the last meeting?
That's beginning November 9. from the last meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
Okay, is there a second?
So we can have discussion. I will second.
All right, so we've got a motion for grades 6, 7, and 8, our middle school grades, to return to a 3-week rotation as well, beginning on November 9th, did I hear?
Yes.
All right, instead of the staff recommendation for the middle school grades to remain in remote through first semester. Open for discussion. Mr. Fletcher, or is that from last time?
You're muted, Mr. Fletcher.
Okay, Ms. Johnson-Hosner.
I thank you for allowing a second for questions, because my question is very similar to Mr. Fletcher's last question too, regarding transportation. So this would then have us adding middle school 2 weeks before 4th and 5th. So I guess I'm sure transportation can figure this out. And I will echo the sentiments back to the support and safety of our transportation people while we ask this question to either you, Ms. Moore, or Mr. Schneidmiller, the preparation to have 3 different phase dates for, at this point now, pre-K through 8. With the 26th for 1, then the 16th stagger the plan B for 4, 5, and then the 9th for 6 through 8.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. Good question. The routes are established so that we can start running any route at any time. And so, as you know, our bus routes are split into typically 3 runs, and a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school run. So in this case, we would just begin the middle school runs on November 9th, and we would pick up a third of the students on that A rotation and continue through the rotation. So short answer is yes, it works, and we can accommodate.
So that means, Mr. Steinmiller, you're saying that those routes will not have any overlap of elementary and middle school?
Yeah, well, for the most part, yes. We do have some elementary and middle schools that ride together. Heritage is an example, Westlake is an example, and we will need to make certain adjustments for those routes. But we've got that, and we're figuring that out. So that will not be an issue.
Yeah. And while I have you, because I haven't asked this question, I know that we've had our transportation staff doing lots of other duties, but have we also talked to them about the accountability plan that was presented to us earlier today in policy and their role in the feedback to students and their own safety as bus drivers specifically?
Yes, ma'am. They have kept up with, everything that you see on the website, the trainings and everything as we prepare to reopen. Bus drivers have been exposed to all of that, and will continue to keep them abreast on everything pertaining to the reopening to make certain that they're ready.
I will certainly make the same recommendation for the safety of our bus drivers as I made for our students, that I would certainly like to ensure that there is a concerted effort to make sure that they're aware of not just the plans, because I'm sure they're paying attention to our school board meetings like everyone else, but it just makes me feel better to know that we're actually doing the due diligence to make sure that they are aware of all the things that we're putting in place and the expectations and precautions, because it's very different to know those precautions while they're while they're doing food service or distribution of devices, to being back on their bus routes, which will also be their first day as bus drivers under these conditions. So I would appreciate a concerted effort towards them. And I thank you for answering that question that had not related to this vote. The second question I have about, and thank you for letting me know that they're only, it sounds like just the same campus schools do a joint route. So I'm going to take that as a yes for that. So my follow-up question regarding middle school is back to, I guess, Superintendent Moore or academics. So for those families who have multiple siblings on Plan B, they would be beginning with 6th through 8th in group 3, so that they're all on the same cohort.
If we begin 6, 8 in a 3-week rotation, we will maintain them on the same cohorts as their elementary siblings. If they have siblings that are 4, 5 that are in the rotation, yes.
Okay, because I think that's going to be important too if I don't have more than one child, so maybe I can't think this way, but that would be cohort 3.
So it would be.
Or would we start 1 and then cohort 2 for 4, 5 on the 16th?
So,
do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because November 9th would be the first week for 6th through 8th, but November 16th would be the first week for 4, 5. So I don't need to know the answer. I just want to make sure that we're aware that we would be starting grades on 2 separate weeks who may have siblings in those 2 separate levels of school.
Right. So it would seem to me that in order to, so the rationale for the November 9th start for middle school had to do with reserving the last week of January for potential in-person exams that some students in middle and larger number of students in high school would need to take. So at whatever point we start with the 3-week rotations, if it's across multiple grade spans, they will match their siblings.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to hear, I wanted parents to hear that that you would not naturally just be starting on week 1 for 4th and 5th.
Well, I don't think parents have even received, I don't think they've received what rotation you're on yet, so.
Oh, you know that doesn't matter how we think about this.
Yes, okay.
because we all naturally think sequentially, so that's why I think it's important to lift that up.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Sutton.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. Some of our middle schools are year round for capacity purposes already. Are we, and I meant to ask this before, is the proposal to keep all of our year round schools in a single track right now?
So 2 things. One revisits the vote that you just made for 4th and 5th grade. And then this vote as well with regards to year-round schools. And I don't know if maybe I need Drew perhaps to hop on and provide the details here, but that is how we ensure that for both calendars, we are providing the equal amount of time, which may shift the start date of the rotations a bit. And I'm going to turn it over here to Drew and see if he's got some background on this, because I do believe he texted me.
Yes, ma'am. And I didn't want to muddy the waters any more than was necessary, but I think one question that will need to be determined is if we take a common start date for all calendars for when the rotations will begin, there will be some variance, for example, between the traditional calendar and the year-round calendar that ends a couple of weeks sooner semester-wise. So we can either choose to have a common start date and some variance in the number of rotations that a student would experience across those 2 calendars, right? Or we could stagger the start date based on the calendar to ensure that we have a consistent number of rotations across those calendars. And so there's some complexities there across calendars. And I think ultimately the decision just needs to be made. Do we want to have all of our middle school students, for example, have the same number of in-person 3-week rotations, regardless of what calendar they're on? And if the answer is yes, then we would just need to adjust the year-round calendar forward by 2 weeks, essentially, in order for that to happen and have the same number of rotations as traditional calendar students would receive, if that makes sense.
that does, Chair Sutton, would that need to be, or Jonathan, would that need to be added? An additional?
What my suggestion would be is that if to try to keep it simple is to finish 6 through 8, do the 9 through 12, and then have a final motion at the end that just would making a motion about the year-round calendars that would cover all of that, and it would essentially modify any prior motion and accepted to address the year-rounds. I mean, that would be what I would suggest.
Okay.
And then I had another question. I certainly respect and acknowledge that for families who chose the plans, who did say they were going to be comfortable returning to in-person learning, and navigating that, as our governor said, this is what he is okayed to do, and I very much respect that. I do worry, and I know Ms. Cash brought up the academic load that our middle school students do face. And I don't know what kind of supports we can have from academics to either offer a little bit of grace within pacing guidelines so that our teachers aren't overwhelmed. And I particularly think that so many of our middle school teachers are going to be teaching in-person cohorts and virtual academy. So this is another one of those times where I know it's going to be difficult, and our teachers are amazing, but I know this is going to be a lift for them. So I don't know what kind of, I really hope we can extend some grace with pacing. I understand that what drives pacing are those standardized tests, but I hope we could find a balance within that right now, understanding that none of this is ideal.
And Ms. Scott, I can confirm that academics and academic advancement as a whole will be working with our schools to provide those supports. And ultimately, as you just referenced, I think we already recognize, given the amount of time that it's taking our teachers to work through the content standards, it is taking more time. And so I think when we, even going back to our previous discussion, when we add in an additional asynchronous day, we've got to acknowledge that it has implications on our ability to adequately teach at the depth that's required, the curriculum and the standards. And so our staff absolutely will be working with schools in that regard.
I appreciate that. And it's hard for parents too to keep up with what exactly are their children, are they behind? Are they on task right now? I mean, it's just so hard on everyone. And I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Cook. Thank you. Those were my questions.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Scott. Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And looking at this presentation today, this slide 7 was the one that struck me the most. That fully 80% of our middle school principals, 86% say remaining remote is the most feasible option, because but I was still angered to see that, because our middle and high school students need to see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's been said their expectation was to get back to in-person learning. And I really feel for the students that want to be back in school, but I also recognize that we didn't make these circumstances, and we have to be safe and secure. And so, Mr. Cook, your point about losing instructional time with the rotations did resonate with me, because the students who are struggling do not need to lessen their instructional time. So it's with great reluctance that I have to embrace that thought and recognize that it's probably sounder to stay remote, but I'm really not happy about it. And I have to say that, because these students need to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know how else to say it other than we need to be far more proactive and intentional about getting our students engaged if they're struggling in remote, engaged in the co-curricular and athletics that we've talked about. I am glad our middle schoolers have the spring semester to look forward to, so that they don't have to, that they will have a full athletic year crammed into that semester. So I hope we are really engaging our students and looking forward to that, so they can look forward to something that is going to give them some semblance of the school year that they have tried to envision. Thank you for letting me vent.
Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I was going to start also with the note on slide 7. While that it is written in the positive that remaining remote is most feasible, I believe that's polite educators speak of saying that the other options are not feasible. I will have to vote no on this option, and I also would have had to vote no on keeping everything remote, because I believe that binary options, neither of them is an appropriate plan. I believe we can make some inroads with the extracurriculars and sports teams. I think that is a positive, but I believe that there must be a third way that is not ignoring the challenges of fully remote, but is also not forcing us into this remote rotation. It's not forcing us into this rotation environment. So I do not feel that at this time we have a plan for 6-8, but we need a plan that both our principals can tell us is possible, and it also, our teachers must be able to tell us it's possible. Like I noted earlier, this is not an issue of fear for teachers. There is fear for some, but this is primarily an issue of logistics. Is it possible? To the concern about falling behind curriculum, we talk about this regularly, even prior to COVID. This is a challenge across education, is this debate between depth and coverage. If you look at most curricula right now, we are still far too focused on coverage. This is the issue with pacing guides. I think you will see, once we're past COVID, that there have been challenges in terms of, have we covered all of the material? But I actually believe that some of the work that's going on is actually going greater in depth. And so I believe that we can address some of these learning issues by going back to the conversations that we were having before COVID and need to continue to have, and that is depth versus coverage. I think we need to back off on the coverage so that we can have rich and authentic depth. But I will obviously have to vote no, because I do not believe we have a plan. I don't believe staying remote is appropriate, and I don't believe that a rotation is appropriate. We need a third way.
I continue to be astounded when you say that there's no work being done and that we don't have a plan. You may not agree with what's presented, but to say that we don't have a plan is astounding to me. But at any rate, Mr.
I did not say that work is not being done. Don't put words in my mouth, please.
Well, you stated that earlier, that there was no work had been done, and you've stated several times that there's no plan.
No, sir, I have never said that there has no work been done. I have said that we are not where we need to be to have a plan that can actually be carried out in our schools. And I believe the principal statement is consistent with that. I believe what we've been hearing from teachers across the board, and no, this is not just a politically driven argument. This is a practicality argument. We are hearing that, this rotation plan is not going to be effective, and we need a plan. It's not something that we as the board can decide. Right? This is the job of central office, to make sure that there is a plan that has buy-in by your principals, that has buy-in by your staff. Principals report to you, they do not report to us. But we have to have a plan that has strong buy-in by those who will actually be carrying out the plan. When we have that, it will get my vote.
Can I just add, I think the rotation plan, Dr. Martin, in all sincerity, is going to keep our folks safe. It's going to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19 in our schools. To have this small cohort of students coming through so our teachers and our students can become accustomed to these protocols that are going to keep us safe and healthy in our schools, keep our schools open, and keep our schools healthy and safe. I have bought into the cohort, and I understand it's difficult for our teachers. I do. And that breaks my heart too.
There has to be a third way.
Sir, we have thought about third ways. We thought about the single grade entries in the summer. And I'm sorry if I interrupted, Chair Sutton, but We thought about the single grade entries. We see there are problems with that. There are no great solutions, and our students and our staff and our community deserve some decisions tonight. And I do think we're trying to make the best decisions we can in a really difficult environment. And I want us to, I had started with the 4 C's because I truly think there are some folks that can figure this out once we get these cohorts going. We need to be nimble. We need to rely on Superintendent Moore to bring us, hey, this is working, this isn't working. And she needs to be able to have the confidence of her board and her community and her leadership team to make the changes we need to keep our staff safe, to keep our students safe, to prevent the spread of COVID in our community. There have been spikes when schools open up in other communities. And I don't want that to be Wake County. And I want us to be thoughtful, and because we have 160,000 kids, 20,000 employees, 1 million people living here, and we are a significant part of this community.
Absolutely.
So yes, we're being cautious, and I want us to be thoughtful and cautious and listen to experts who tell us the cohorts work and give that a try.
I believe that our teachers and principals are experts. And I believe that what we have done is exclusively look at stay remote or just the cohort educational option. And what I have been suggesting, and I have suggested this privately earlier, and I'm now suggesting it publicly, that I believe that there has got to be ways to address some of the social emotional aspects as part of our plan that do not create this impossibility from an instructional and logistic in the school perspective. And I have not heard any of that out of the box thinking, which I believe would be possible to, couldn't agree more that we've got to have safety. We have not addressed, well, I mean, the cohorts will help keep class sizes low for now, but it will overload the responsibility for teachers. We need more staff. We have not had a request for that extra staff. We've got 10 extra staff to help us go to
Sir, the cohort's going to be for 3 weeks. I understand that's hard. It's for 3 weeks, and then we need to get in school. And now
we cannot go in school with our 6-8, which is what we're talking about right now.
Mr. Chairman, can you step in here?
Yeah.
Can you step in here? This conversation has been dominated by one board member to the exclusion of the rest of us.
That is not true, Mr. Hagerty.
That is absolutely true. Jim, you can go back and just time yourself and time how much time you have spent going through each of these plans, repeating yourself, making the same points over and over. With all due respect, you are not being respectful to the rest of us on the board or to staff. Yeah. We've raised our hands, we've gone in order, and even Ms. Kushner, has waited and waited, had the opportunity to give some comments, which I applaud, which I thought were great comments, and then continue to wrest control of that. You've made your point. You don't like virtual learning. You don't like virtual. You don't have a plan. You don't have a plan. This is not a lab. This is not a social experiment. You cannot just tinker around and look for some magical lab result. These are real people's lives. And staff has worked hard to come up with a plan for social distancing to follow all of these near impossible state guidelines. They have worked all summer on this, and the state keeps changing the guidance over and over and over. First, we're on Plan B. Then, the legislature gives us stuff. Now, you can bring back kids for Plan A. And then what's in the toolkits keeps changing. We've brought in the scientific experts. The scientific experts have told us there are ways to reopen safely.
I agree.
They have given us the plan. They have given us the model. Okay? Whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, that is your right. That is your right. But please allow the rest of us to advocate for our points. There are families who are struggling with virtual learning. There are families that struggle with in-person learning.
Correct.
We need to give every family an option to stay virtual if they have a legitimate health issue. And I think we're committed to doing that. For the rest of the families that are ready to come back to school that do not have a health concern, and for staff that is ready to come back to school and have a health concern, and that we can protect, and that we can provide good PPE that fits, and we can give an accountability system, which you have fought so hard for.
And so
If
we
we
have a
can
good one.
provide all of those things, then we can get through the rest of this. So you can argue that, you know what, this option I've presented, it only gives people maybe 1 week before the end of the semester. But I believe having kids in the schools and giving those teachers the face-to-face contact with those students, the opportunity to connect, the opportunity to assess, the opportunity to see things that they cannot see over a computer screen is important. Again, I don't want to put anybody at risk at all. That weighs very, very heavily on me. I've talked to people in our private schools that have reopened. I've talked to teachers, I've talked to administrators about what they have been able to do. I've talked to people in other school districts about how to do this. Superintendent Moore is right. There's no good way to do this, but some things are important. And we have children that are struggling on 504 plans, on IEP plans, that we're not able to give them the services that they need. And even if it's just 1 week before the end of the semester rotating through, I think there's a benefit. Mr. Cook has raised some very valid points, and there are administrative obstacles. But at some point, you have to go forward. So, Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would like to call the question on my motion and move us to a vote, yay or nay. I've said all I can say.
Thank you. So we've had a call to question. I know there were a couple of additional questions, but there's been a call to question, so we need to move to vote. I thank you for the sentiments and a motion there.
Chairman Sutton,
Yes.
I'm not going to make any changes, but have we answered all the questions? I think one of our board members, a couple of board members had an opportunity to talk a lot about, I don't have any questions, but they got a lot discussed in a short amount of time, and they both made very good points. And now we have a call for question. I just want to be sure everybody has had their questions answered. And I know there may be some, like Robert's Rules of Orders, that we can't do.
If I could speak to that, Ms. Cash, I mean, basically the call for the question would be if everybody's had a chance to speak on the motion. So that's what your rules of parliamentary procedure state. Just so that we're all on the same page about that. Policy 2340, that's a procedural motion, and a procedural motion on that would be a call for the question. And what this says is the motion is not in order until every member has had an opportunity to speak. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fletcher, do you have any more comments? You're muted, sir.
Yes, thank you. I think the challenges that we're seeing in any plan that comes before us now is in large part due to the time of year that it's coming. If we were to be designing a plan, which I'm sure staff is doing, for the beginning of the second semester, before teachers have been assigned to share students in Plan B and virtual in the same classroom because they're taking the same subject. The opportunity for schools to organize in a different way at the beginning of the second semester is everything that would simplify what we're talking about and would allow teachers to have less of a load than saying, because you are now teaching virtual and Plan B, we're going to bring kids in on a cohort basis, and you're going to have, if you only have one preparation, you're blessed. If you've got 2 or 3 preparations, you are stretched to the limit. So I think a lot of the challenges that we've got right now in terms of how teachers are going to be overwhelmed with, I mean, I think the superintendent said 50% of our teachers will be working on multiple platforms, is the result of the time of year we're trying to make this change. Now, I want to support kids coming back into the school building. I also want to keep our staff employed. And so I'm wondering what the balance is here in this particular motion. And I would like for the motion to be restated, if you would, just so I'm clear about what the potential vote might be. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So again, the motion is to move grades 6, 7, and 8 to a 3-week rotation beginning on November 9th. So instead of the staff recommendation to remain remote through first semester, the motion is to move grades 6, 7, and 8 to the 3-week cohort rotation beginning on November 9th.
One clarification, if I may ask. The draft last week shows that rotation, but then on January 11, it shows everybody going back into remote. Is the intention of the motion to continue rotation into second semester until we adopt a different plan?
I believe the intention of the vote was to wait. I think Superintendent Moore said that we would, in a few weeks, be hearing plans about what the plans are beginning in January. And so I think the intention of the intention of the motion was simply for the remainder of this semester.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, so I'll call for the roll call vote. Mrs. Cash?
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner?
Although I think Mr. Cook's concerns, has raised concerns that there's going to be a loss of instructional time, I'm a nay.
Okay, Dr. Martin?
I cannot vote for a plan that 86% of principals say is not feasible, therefore I vote nay.
Mrs. Scott?
I'm also concerned about the instructional time with this, but I'll vote aye.
All right, Mr. Hagerty?
I can't believe that we would get to a proposal last week that on Plan B that we've been working for weeks, and then just find out today that principals don't like it. I'm voting aye.
All right. Ms. Mahaffey?
My vote is aye.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler?
Again, I can continue to say how difficult this is. I'm a nay vote for 6th through 8th in person.
Mr. Fletcher?
Nay.
And it seems that I'm a tiebreaker. I'll vote aye in support of the motion. So that would be 6, 7, and 8 grades returning to on a 3-week cohort starting November 9th on a 5-4 vote. All right, that takes us to our high school, grades 9 through 12. Ms. Johnson-Hostler?
Yes, I'm certain no one is surprised that my vote specifically for high school will be to have our high school students, based on all the recommendations that I've talked about earlier today, that they remain remote for the remainder of first semester.
Is that a motion? I'm just
That's
trying.
a motion. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I'll second that motion.
All right, so we've got a motion from Ms. Johnson-Hostler and a second by Mr. Fletcher for grades 9 through 12 to remain in remote through first semester, which is then in support of staff's recommendation. Is there any discussion? Dr. Martin?
With respect, Mr. Hagerty, I am only responding when recognized. Thank you for recognizing me. I concur that right now the high schools need to stay in remote for the reasons Ms. Johnson-Hostler stated. Again, our principals suggested that as well. At the same time, as I noted before, I think that while we may not put it directly in the plan, I would like to strongly request that staff create intentional plans to address the social emotional connection that our students need. I believe that there are things that should be possible in that realm that are not bringing our students back formally in classes for instruction, but I believe that there are options and we need to explore that seriously. Thank you.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Along those lines, I would like to see if we can bring students back if they have a lab they need to do for one of their lab sciences or work that they need to do with one of their CTE courses. You know, there's a lot of hands-on in high school, and if that is, you know, I'm concerned about our students who are taking, you know, biology or chemistry and don't have access to a lab right now. And so if some exceptions can be made by staff for that, I would greatly appreciate it.
We're happy to look into those options and where that might be needed. I believe that, you know, we've said before, there's not a replacement for in-person instruction, and these are perfect examples of that. I believe that they are having to do their labs virtually, which is not, you know, it is an option and it is a tool. But I will certainly follow up with our academics team to see if there are ways to start building some of that return in some way, shape, or form, and where it might be needed.
Yeah, I think there was a part in the presentation earlier, Superintendent Moore, that talked about bringing some of the students back that were those that had a state final exam. So perhaps in that, could something be considered and brought back to us to consider at a later date?
Well, I mean, I think they're adjacent to what this recommendation would end up being in terms of the work that needs to happen. But in this particular recommendation, if you're remaining remote, we are asking that last week of the semester for high school students and any of the middle school students, which is why they were starting November 9th, be available for any state end of course tests that right now they are required to take in person.
Yeah. Mr. Fletcher.
I'm just superintendent. This adopting this virtual remote schedule for the rest of the semester would not prohibit students participating in activities on campus relative to things like having CTE or have some other courses. Would those opportunities still be possible, even though their primary instruction is happening on a remote basis?
So similar to what we've done with athletics, we would need to create protocols and expectations around any activities on campus that involve students with regards to limits and masking and social distancing and that sort of thing. So we're going to bring you back something with some arts programs. We'll look at extracurriculars. It may be all part of that package.
Thank you very, very much.
All right, so we've got a motion and a second to support the staff recommendation for grades 9 through 12 to remain in remote through first semester. I'll call for the vote. Mr. Fletcher.
I vote aye.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Aye.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Aye.
Mr. Hagerty.
I mean, based upon the logistical problems you've brought up here with the schedules, I guess I'll vote aye.
Mrs. Scott.
And excuse me, I would agree. I appreciate that my colleagues have spoken up to try to do something for the in-person opportunities that are important here, but this is, I also vote aye.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you. True hope that we develop some social programming. I will vote aye.
Mrs. Kushner,
Nay.
Mrs. Cash,
Yes, I do want to say as well, I do think I'm really excited about the athletic program working so well that we have started, and I hope that we'll do similar things in our high schools. So however, saying that, I vote aye.
and I vote aye as well. So if my count is right, that's 8-1 in support of the motion to remain, for high school to remain in remote through the first semester. Okay. So then there was one final piece of action, I think, around the year-round calendar and how that would be integrated. Ms. Mahaffey, did you have a motion around that?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you have a motion? I think it was you that raised a question about the year-round schools. I wasn't clear. I know there was question response.
No, that.
May I make a stab at it, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
That the rotation of cohorts align across calendars to support the children from a single household being in school, regardless of their grade level, being in school at the same time. I think that is the gist of what we were trying to talk about earlier.
So if I could just step in for a moment, I think the issue was whether to begin all of the calendars into if they are coming in on rotations, to begin the rotations for all calendars at the same time, or to vary the start time of the rotations based on the calendar. The number of instructional days pretty much remains the same regardless, but whether it becomes a opportunity for how many rotations of how many cycles of 3-week rotations is impacted by when we start. So the question is, do you want the same number of cycles of rotations, or is it okay to start on the same day, even though that may not lead to the same number of cycles in terms of the rotations based on when the calendar break is?
So the way things would be right now, right, with what the board has approved, you've established certain dates for K through 3, 4 through 5, 6 through 8. So unless there is a change to that, year-round would come back on the same date and start on the same rotation as traditional. And so the question is whether the board wants to change that. If there's no motion, right, then year-round would follow the same date. There'd be a common return to in-person rotation as traditional. Is that right, Kathy?
That's correct. And
Okay.
This is about the efficiency of picking a date where everyone comes back versus starting to stagger that based on calendar.
Which is pretty much in line with what we had originally decided when we said that our year rounds would pretty much be single track, correct or no?
Proposal started all calendars on the same date versus differentiating. We may need to do something a little different for our early colleges because of their semesters and the partnerships with the institutions of higher education, but otherwise it would be the same date.
So then can I entertain a motion then to empower staff to align the calendars for the purpose of efficiency and to align those start dates so that we have the most efficient start?
It's my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, that we're not talking about changing the calendar for year round. It's just literally when they would return to, when they would start an in-person rotation or not. Isn't that correct, Kathy?
That's correct.
What I would suggest, if I could, Mr. Chairman, would be, since right now where things stand, the board has determined a common start date for rotation of in-person, that perhaps staff could look at any complications associated with that for year-round and maybe bring a proposal next at the meeting next Tuesday if there would be any changes or revisions that would need to be made that make sense. I don't think that requires a motion because right now you've established a common start date. The board can do what they wish. I'm just wondering whether that makes sense at this point.
Well, I was taking your guidance earlier when you mentioned that there would be a fifth motion, but I kind of wondered then if we actually needed one. So we'll wait on staff to analyze the dates and get back to us on Tuesday if there needs to be any proposed change or action taken by the board.
And Mr. Sutton, Superintendent Moore, I think you was alluding to this, but that includes the leadership academies, which are middle and high combined.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so then to summarize sort of where we are, I think that concludes our action for this evening with the vote for K-3 and regional programs to begin face-to-face instruction beginning October 26th. That our grades 4 through 5 would begin on the 3-week rotation beginning November 16th. That's grades 6, 7, and 8. 6, 7, and 8 would also begin on the 3-week rotation beginning November 9th. And our house school grades 9 through 12 would remain remote through the first semester. Board members, I thank you for your attention and work on this this evening, regardless of where you sit, how you feel, and that of our community. I think that we owed our students, our staff, and everyone involved some direction and some leadership and guidance. I think that we provided that this evening, and I'm sure that there will be many that will continue to share their thoughts as we move forward. Go to again return to face-to-face instruction as soon as we can safely do so and operationally do so in a sound manner as well. So with that,
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, before we adjourn, I think it's a time for us to note that the next meeting will be in person. Can you give us a summary of the October 6th meeting?
Yep. So as we discussed earlier, for those that might have missed our discussion in policy, we heard a plan from staff to begin our transition back to a face-to-face board meeting. So starting with our first meeting in October, which is next Tuesday, October 6th, we will be back here at Crossroads in our normal meeting space. There are some protocols and procedures in place that speak to both public attendance and public comment. In short, the room is limited to 25 people. That includes the non-board members and a mixture of staff, media, and the public. That plan and procedures will be put forward on our website with specific instructions and procedures around both a limited number of participants for public comment and a limited number of participants that can actually attend the meeting face-to-face. So as that information is put out, please, those that are interested, please make sure you pay attention to the website so that you are familiar with those procedures in our practice. As again, we return to face-to-face instruction, face-to-face board meeting attendance next Tuesday, October 6th.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I'll second Mr. Fletcher's motion to adjourn.
All right, got a motion and a second to adjourn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. Mrs. Cash?
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner?
Aye.
Dr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Hagerty?
Aye.
Mrs. Mahaffey?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler?
Aye.
Mr. Fletcher?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Unanimous vote. We stand adjourned. Thank you for your time and attention this evening. Everybody be safe and have a good night.
Thank you, Chair Sutton.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.